12, 2015 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. If you haven't already done so, there are copies of our agenda on either side of the room. Please pick one up and you can follow along with our proceedings tonight. There will be opportunities for public comment at both items of a general nature as well as with respect to items on our agenda. I am going to execute some mayoral privilege, and we're going to take item 16, public comments of a general nature, and we're going to address that earlier tonight, probably right after the council member reports on number 8. So just to give people a heads up on that. That's when we'll take public comments of general nature. It is our proud tradition to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, and you may have noticed that we have a new change here in Village Hall Chambers. There is an American flag over to the east side of Chambers here, so we all get to face in the same direction for once in reciting the pledge. So at this point, I'd like to ask everyone to please rise and join us in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thank you for arranging that. I would now like to ask our fine village clerk to please call the roll.
Commissioner Waldeck.
Here.
Commissioner White.
Here.
Commissioner Fatimo. Here. Commissioner Jose.
Here.
Commissioner Olson.
Here.
Commissioner Barnett.
Here.
Mayor Tully.
Here. Thank you very much. That brings us to, we already had the executive session. We'll skip item 3. And we did the call to order. We did the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'll go right to item 5. We just did that roll call. So we'll go right to item 6, minutes of council meetings. We have one set of minutes to approve from our May 5th, 2015, meeting of the Village Council. Are there any changes, comments, or corrections to those minutes from any members of the Village Council?
Mayor Tully, I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those minutes are approved. Very good. That brings us to item 7. Which is reserved for proclamations, and we have a proclamation tonight. We also have some very special guests in chambers tonight. A number of the fine members of the Downers Grove Police Department are here tonight, along with Police Chief Porter, and for good reason, because tonight we are reading a proclamation that pertains to Police Week in the Village of Downers Grove, and I'm sure Chief Porter will be telling us a little bit more about that in a moment. I'll read the proclamation. I'd like to invite Chief Porter down. I will present you with the proclamation and then ask you to share a few words with us. So I'll go ahead and read the proclamation so you can take your time heading to the podium. Whereas the Congress and President of the United States have designated May 15th as Peace Officers Memorial Day and the week in which it falls as Police Week. And whereas the members of the Downers Grove Police Department play an essential role in safeguarding the rights and freedoms of Downers Grove. And whereas it is important that all citizens know and understand the problems, duties, and responsibilities of their police department, and that the members of the Downers Grove Police Department recognize their duty to serve the people by safeguarding life and property, by protecting them against violence or disorder, and by protecting the innocent against deception and the weak against oppression. And whereas the Downers Grove Police Department unceasingly provides a vital public service, now therefore I, Martin T. Tully, Mayor of the Village of Downers Grove, call upon all citizens of Downers Grove and upon all patriotic, civil, and educational organizations in our community to observe the week of May 10th through May 16th, 2015 as Police Week, with appropriate ceremonies in which all of our people may join in commemorating police officers, both past and present, who by their faithful and loyal devotion to their responsibilities have rendered a dedicated service to their communities, and in doing so have established for themselves an enviable and enduring reputation for preserving the rights and security of all citizens. I'll be right there.
Thank you, Mayor. The proclamation pretty much says it all. Being a police officer is a difficult job, but I can't think of any job that's more important. So I had asked our shift here to come by, and Mayor, I'd like to have them come up here and accept the proclamation. I'm very proud of our officers and the work that they do for our community each and every day. So officers, if you'd like to step up. And
If I'd only been at rehearsal, I would have known. Unless you hold the proclamation.
Put up on the second stair there, thank you.
One thing I did want to mention, every year during National Law Enforcement Week, we have a ceremony to honor one of our own officers, Officer Richard Barth, who died in the line of duty. That ceremony is going to be this Thursday, 1 o'clock at the First Presbyterian Church. The public is all welcome. You'll have a number of our officers there. We'll have officers from other communities. And we take a moment, about a half hour, an hour, to really reflect on those who have died serving their communities and our country. So again, Mayor, thank you for the opportunity as a reminder, and the community, the council is all welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it very much, and congratulations again on all the accomplishments that you and your department have achieved over the last number of years. We're proud to have you part of our community and proud to give you the support necessary to achieve those things. The Barth Memorial Service is one that I've had the humbling pleasure and privilege to attend over a number of years, and every year I find it just as humbling and as introspective as the year before. So if anyone has not had the opportunity to attend it in the past, I would strongly encourage you to do so. It truly is a very touching and moving ceremony, particularly with family members of Officer Barth always in attendance. Makes it particularly touching and introspective for all that our men and women of our fine police force do for our community and those of other communities as well. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for you and your officers being here tonight, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor.
That will then bring us to council member reports, item number 8. This is an opportunity for members of the village council to share with others in the room here tonight, as well as their colleagues, items of interest or various goings on in the community. I think I'll start with my right tonight with Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to extend my gratitude to Chief Porter and the entire police department for their selfless service to the community. You truly do a great job, and you deserve the recognition here tonight, and frankly, every day. So that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Waldeck.
I'll second what Commissioner Jose said, and I have no additional report.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Commissioner Fatimo.
No report, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Barnett.
No report, Mayor.
Commissioner White.
I'll third what Mr. Jose said, other than that, no report.
And Commissioner Olson.
No report.
I only had 2 things I was going to point out. One was a reminder about the Barth Memorial Service, which we've already covered that. The only other thing I'll mention is on Sunday, May 17th, 2015, there is a 5K that is being run here in town. It was formerly Run for Hope, Noah's Hope, to help fight bat disease, which affects a family here in Downers Grove. The race has now been renamed the Cupcake Classic, but it is the 4th annual race of this event, and that will be taking place on Sunday, May 17th. I was trying to find the time. I'm going to guess it's either at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, but you can go to signmeup.com and search for Cupcake Classic if you're interested in registering. Good event that's run here in Downers Grove. Hopefully the weather will be better than it was last weekend, and for a good cause and in support of a Downers Grove family. So I just want to remind everyone of that.
I have it
as
at,
well.
I have it at 8:30.
8:30, I split the difference. I said 8, 9, 8:30. Perfect. Thank you, Commissioner. That's all I have, so that'll bring us to item 9, which is reserved for public hearings, and we do have oh yes, I forgot. After having promised public comment, just want to make sure you were paying attention out there. Thank you, Commissioner, for reminding me. As previously indicated, we're going to move item 16, which is reserved for public comment of a general nature, up to now. So any members of the public who are here that have any questions or comments of a general nature would like to share them with the village council, I would invite you to please come to the podium and do so.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. It's nice to see the council seated so nicely, and you're all looking very handsome and beautiful tonight. Bill Robles, 7800 Queens Court. When I was driving here this evening, I was listening to a radio station, and there was a recent state's attorney from Madison, Wisconsin, who issued a report supporting a police officer who was under tremendous pressure for having killed someone to defend his life, his own life. This person attacked him. And I wanted just to call everyone's attention to the fact, in keeping with Chief Porter and the wonderful men that were here tonight, that the community should respect the authority that's vested in those officers. So when an officer says stop, you stop. When an officer says, "I want to talk to you," you don't attack him or her. It's very important. Our country is going through a problem right now trying to distinguish the importance of the police officer, and we cannot diminish their role in public safety. That's comment number one. Comment number two, I want to compliment the council, mayor, in putting the public comment up front here. It's very nice to see it back where it belongs. Thank you. Will this continue on or just for this meeting?
We're going to have a discussion later tonight about that topic as part of the governance retreat, but my expectation, at least my desire, is yes.
Okay.
But I obviously will act in concert with the rest of my colleagues.
Well, you have my vote to continue it in this position.
All right, we've got one.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Other questions or comments of a general nature? Questions or comments of a general nature? Good evening.
Yes, my name is Michael Hahn. I live at 4040 Glendenning. My comment tonight is about the new signs that we have in place. I feel it was a total waste of money. The new signs are not any better than the old ones. To me, they appear to be pretentious. They obstruct one another. They're difficult to see. In some cases, they obscure roads and driveways because they're lower. It costs a lot of money to put these signs up. And it probably hurt a lot of our small businesses. One thing for sure, it didn't come out of Mr. Walgreen's pocket to put up that sign. It came out of the consumer's pocket. I recently told a friend to go to Tech Auto on Ogden Avenue. They had trouble finding it because that sign is no longer visible when you're driving from the east. A couple weeks ago, my wife and I, for the first time, went to Egg Harbor in downtown Downers Grove. You have to drive past the building before you can see the sign. What's the point of having signs if you can't see them? I feel that it was just a waste of everybody's money and time to do this. I don't want to see our village become like Westmont. And in case any of you didn't know, there's an awful lot of vacancies in Westmont. My last count, between Ogden Avenue and 63rd Street, there's 63 vacant storefronts. We don't want that to happen to our town. So in the future, I'd like to caution the council to be careful about the regulations that come out of the council. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your perspective, sir. Other questions or comments of a general nature? Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. My name is Bob Peterson, and I live at 6861 Camden Road, Downers Grove. And I also own Live and Guth Moving and Storage in Downers Grove. It's been there since 1928. I was presented with some news articles in regards to signs from Riverside Brookfield, and I'd like to hand each one of everybody one of those, including the village attorney. And just to kind of comment along with the signs, the size of the signs, I was here when they had some discussions on the house on Maple Avenue, the Edwards House, and we heard several different occasions and several different meetings about the heritage of Downers Grove. And I consider the only sign that I have left that's painted on a wall in Downers Grove that's left, the only one in town. And I consider that part of the heritage of Downers Grove and have been asked to remove, and it's in process. probably can't say too much about it because it's in court right now, but proceedings can be altered, adjusted from this council, and we can save the village. I don't know if it's myself and everybody else that's involved in different lawsuits, and save everybody a lot of money by the simple change, if you read that. In short, it pertains to the current signs that those villages have to be grandfathered in the ones that are not in compliance. And if a percentage of that sign is damaged, now you comply with the current codes, which I think everybody can understand. And I think that this council and probably everybody in the village doesn't understand that, I think I've heard that the position is about 97, maybe even 98% of the signs are in compliance. But I would say it's close to 90% of the small businesses that are so upset with the sign ordinance, for one, and perhaps even the Edward House, the way it was handled, for two, was the outcome of the election, that changes have to be made. And changes can be made with a simple, for the sign ordinance, of what you've got. And as this gentleman said here about the size of a sign, I wasn't going to bring it up, but I will now. But if you head on Main Street, south of 63rd by the firehouse, there's a sign on the east side of the street for the Downers Grove Park District. You go on the southbound lane, traveling the speed limit, see how far you can read past Downers Grove Park District to read what's the rest of the sign. You can't. You got to turn around, come back, and go slow to be able to read it because it's too small. And that's what's happened in town. The signs are too small, and the way the signs were handled is what's upsetting. I still have people, today I went into the bookstore downtown. I had my shirt on. Oh, you're the guy with the sign. Hey, what's going on with that? What's going on down there? What's happening? I don't know. I can't say too much because it's in federal court. And I hope something can be adjusted because we can call it quits and move on. And everybody's happy. But the cat's already out of the bag as to what can be done. The people that have problems with their signs of having to move it, businesses have left town because of it. Businesses have slowed down their business. There was no concern, I think, of the business owners, the people that work in the businesses, if there's any layoffs it caused because of a slowdown in business. It hurt Downers Grove big time. And I just want people to realize that because I'm probably the only one left to speak of it. Because everybody else has complied and nobody complained because they had to. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Other questions or comments of a general nature? Good evening.
Good evening. It's nice to see the new council seated tonight. Laurel Bowen, 829 Clyde Drive. Mr. Pearson just mentioned the sign issue, and I wasn't planning to mention this, but tacking on to his topic, the bank manager at U.S. Bank at the corner of Burlington and Main Street told me that it costs that bank $25,000 to comply with the sign ordinance. They had to have a ladder truck remove the U.S. Bank sign from the top of the building, and now it's located on Burlington facing the train tracks behind a tree. They had to buy a new sign, and you can't see the bank location from Main Street. So I think that's exorbitant cost for our sign ordinance and how it's detrimental to a lot of businesses in Downers Grove. My purpose tonight is to discuss Clyde Estates. I'd like to know why the village has a desire to change the character of Clyde Estates. We've been established neighborhood since it was created in 1952, primarily ranch homes, 65 ranch homes, which are very difficult to locate for anyone who's a starter or downsizing or just wants a ranch, like my husband and I when we moved here. I've gotten the feeling since the very beginning that we found out about this project in August last year that I've always wondered what the driver is that's behind this whole project when all we really needed was a 30-year-old street replaced. There's a lot of things that have been going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of. And the village seems to have had a head start on, or individuals that we're not aware of have had a head start on planning or behind-the-scenes input that we're not privy to. The bid went out in March last year, over a year ago, and then the funds of $100,000 was let out for the design of this. And then the first village meeting was in August. Well, I just received a hydrology study that I asked for a long time ago. I just received it last month. And it just so happens that the hydrology study was prepared by Christopher Burke in August. But the village didn't receive it until a week before I received it in April. And I find that really interesting because if you're using stormwater as a reason for redesigning and changing the character of our neighborhood, why didn't the village public works department, who I think is heading up this project, why didn't they have this hydrology study, and why did it take so long for me to receive it? Considering the fact that it mentioned only low to moderate water, and I don't know when they did this, even though the study was dated in August. I don't know how they studied it. I talked to a friend of mine who's a hydrologist that has put in water systems worldwide, and he questioned when I explained, he doesn't live far from me and he knows all about Clyde Estates. He goes through there on his bike all the time. And he said that when I mentioned that on one of the slides that was at our meeting a couple weeks ago, it says that some of the reason for the ditches and the retention area is to clean stormwater and help infiltrate stormwater. Well, stormwater doesn't need to be cleaned. It's already clean when it comes down out of the sky. And unless it's a silt, a river that's a delta or something, you don't need to clean water that's coming down in rain. So he questioned that, and I'm questioning you as well, because this past rain that we had this weekend, there was no laying rain water anywhere in Clyde Estates. And I want the water to water my trees and my bushes and my flowers in my own yard. I don't want it to go anywhere else. Grass is the filter. There's no need to filter water. There's no sediment from dirt. The major issue for the water is on the southeast corner of Clyde, which has been drastically exacerbated since the Y put the field and they raised it, and there's berms over there. So the best design that any common sense person that sees that area would think that the dead end at Lyman and 59th doesn't have storm sewers, and there's a lot of laying water there when it rains in that cul-de-sac. They don't have storm sewers there. And there's an easement that goes between the houses on Clyde and the Y. That it would be a perfect solution to the water that's on that side of the street and those properties that have the water when we have extreme rainfall. I guess that's the only comments I have tonight. I just hope that maybe we can start over. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Other questions or comments of a general nature from members of the audience? Questions or comments of a general nature? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Julie Schlueter, and I live at 4945 Florence Avenue. And I apologize for bringing written notes, but there's a lot of things that need to be said, and I'm speaking for quite a few people on our street. I've come tonight regarding our road and sewer reconstruction, rescheduled for the Maple Florence Street area. I sent each council member an email in the last few weeks regarding the situation on Florence Avenue as it currently stands. The village engineers, as you are aware, sent a notice to all affected households asking for our input for their plans for our street. I attended this meeting and discovered that rather really than looking for input, the village was there to inform us of what was going to happen and when it was going to happen. I approached Nate Hawk, who's in charge of this project, and asked why Maple and Wilcox were not only going to be resurfaced but fitted with curbs as well, while Florence was going to be reground and repaved. He informed me that while Florence would be torn up and used to help with the installation of sewers and curbs for Maple, no upgrade was planned for Florence, and any work on it would be incidental to the Maple project. He told me this could always be appealed to the village council, so here I stand. After attending the resident meeting, I emailed the members of the village council regarding the situation. Mr. Barnett and Mr. Jose responded promptly and have been very helpful in relating the policy in Downers Grove regarding street construction in general. As mentioned in my email, I'm a lifelong resident of Downers Grove, having grown up on the brick streets with my 7 brothers and sisters for the first 21 years of my life, and having spent the next 40 in 3 other neighborhoods. I can tell you that Maple, Wilcox, and Florence area of Downers Grove is the most unimproved, underserved area in this town. Last summer, as we were looking to purchase a smaller home in Downers Grove, our realtor mentioned this lovely home on the east side of Downers Grove was available, but mentioned to us as we drove there that she had brought 2 other clients to see this home, but unfortunately, they wouldn't even get out of the car once they saw the condition of Florence Avenue and the surrounding streets. These clients went on to purchase homes in Hinsdale and Oakbrook that were not as nice as ours, but were in the area with curbs that was better taken care of. Not a great commentary on the village services in Downers Grove. She knew we were Downers Grove people, though, and said she was sure this area was scheduled to be upgraded. I believe once you were made aware of some of the conditions on the street, you will agree that some changes in our reconstruction plan need to be made to fix our street. Florence Avenue is not only a failed street, but one in need of immediate attention. The street is crowned extra high because of multiple layers of asphalt and to allow for some sort of drainage at one time. Because of this, any rock that's placed alongside eventually rolls away down into a culvert. At this point, the dirt begins to erode away from the edge of the street until the street itself begins to crumble away. As bad as the problem is at the north end of the block by Maple Avenue, by the time the water rolls down Florence, is a total disaster down where it joins Burlington. While the asphalt and rocks are unsightly at best, there are several dangerous places created by the failure of this street, as well as attractive nuisances for children. This Christmas, my 90-year-old mother was trying to get out of the car and stepped out only to roll down the culvert. We came out of the house to find my 92-year-old father in the culvert helping her up. There is a 3 to 4 foot drop from the crown of the street to places in the bottom of the culvert. There is a cement cistern barrier on the side of the road that is several feet deep and several feet wide to try and hold the sewer pipe in place. The pipe is bent and rusty, and I will tell you that is the perfect place for a little kid to crawl into, get stuck, or worse. At the bottom of Florence, the drainage becomes so bad that in any sort of bad rain, or several days of rain, or rain where there's any type of freezing, the backup becomes bad enough where at best none of the commuters can use the sidewalks, or at worst an animal or small child could drown. These are dangerous situations that have now been brought to light at a public meeting and are now part of public record. We are sure that the village is unaware of how bad these problems have become. It is irresponsible to say to me that you are aware of the problem and do nothing about it. Although I've lived on these streets only a year, I have talked to most of the neighbors about this situation. They tell me they have written and emailed through the years, but the best they could do was get the big load of white rocks currently lying down at the bottom of Florence and Burlington. Councilman Jose was kind enough last week to come to our area and meet with a few of us regarding this problem. He walked the street as we showed him our ongoing issues with it. My neighbor, Mary Duhigg, who is a daily commuter and has lived there for 10 years, explained the frustration that exists in our neighborhood regarding the street and lack of response from the village. The reason I'm here tonight is that Florence is going to be already torn up as part of the Maple Avenue project. It has obvious problems that need to be addressed as part of this reconstruction. It seems ridiculous to think that the village will come back and address it at another time when they won't do it now. Downers Grove has a policy where streets are supposedly reconstructed with the same format they already have. If it has curbs, it gets curbs. If it has rocks and crumbling asphalt, it gets rocks and asphalt that will eventually crumble. It makes no sense to lay down something that has repeatedly failed in the past. When this policy is being circumvented for Maple Avenue does not have curbs where the reconstruction is taking place, yet it will upon completion. I think that's great and forward-thinking. However, it goes against what I have been repeatedly told is the village policy as the reason for not fixing our street. Most of the people who travel and use that section of Maple just pass through there. They don't live there. We live on our street. We want it fixed and feel justified asking for equity for our street. These decisions do not reflect the village policy or motto of preserving the balance between tradition and progress. The asphalt has no curbs, with no curbs does not work here. They have proven to be dangerous, and that's not progress. I have pictures of some of these problems to show you tonight. As always, pictures probably won't do justice to the situation on Florence, but look at it now and add a flood of water or ice or snow to the situation. Or imagine what I'm going to show you being the street in front of your house where your children cross and play. Imagine as a village council member, this was the picture you had to show when people asked you what your village looked like. My guess is you'd be pretty embarrassed. The snow plows even had a tough time getting down our street as they were able to plow only one lane for us to travel down this winter, meaning you had to back up if someone was coming the other way or risk sliding off into the culvert. Know that we are not a neighborhood divided, as are some of the areas in this town requesting curbs and attention to their street. I have a petition with me tonight with the signatures of all the tax-paying residents that live on our section of street between Burlington and Maple. We want our street fixed. Mr. Baker has put the pictures up on the screens there. The first picture, as you turn off Maple onto Florence, you begin to see the poor street conditions. The second picture, focusing down the street, you can see where the parkway has been eroded by an attempt to smooth things over with rock. At this point, the third picture, at this point, the parkway begins to form a deeper trench. In the next picture, further display of poor or no maintenance along the parkway. In the next one, the trench deepens as you travel south down the block, creating hazardous conditions coming out of your driveway or down the road in bad weather. The next picture shows the elevation from Maple down Florence, and this is only 2 homes down. In the next picture, the eruption you see of this dirt is the remnants of what happened this winter when the snowplow slid off the street and the residents of Florence had to dig it out. If there were curbs, this never would have happened. In the next one, you see again how as Florence drops away from the Maple, the depth of the trench increases and the street edges become more dangerous. And the next slide is an example of what happens when there are no curbs and people try to park in a safe spot. The edges continue to erode, the street is half blocked, and it is dangerous to get out on the driver's side and nearly impossible to get out on the passenger side. In the next slide, you'll see closer what our street has become. The next one shows the cistern barricade cement hole I've told you about. I can stand in that, and the top of that is at my knees. It's used to hold the earth back as an attempt to level the trench and allow for drainage. Imagine any child or animal wandering around playing around this, an attractive nuisance with a great deal of potential for injury or harm. And the next one, the barricade in relation to that parked car. Dangerous, unsightly, and short-sighted in terms of what's supposed to be accomplished. In the next shot, this is what people on the train from Chicago see as they first enter Downers Grove. This is the first street that they see. In the next one, these same curbless edges of the road close up, and in the next slide from a distance. And in the next slide, this is an acceptable solution. Could you flip one more? The next slide, this is an acceptable solution to drainage in a Downers Grove neighborhood. Broken street, rusty pipes, and a load of rock that doesn't do what it intended, keeping water from collecting. The next one was taken after about 30 minutes of light rain. Water's already collecting and forcing gravel onto the sidewalk, which eventually floods completely from street level to the sidewalk, forcing commuters into the already dangerous street. We are uphill from Westmont and the Burlington, and the water comes down from Maple Avenue. It is a Downers Grove problem. Could you flip? Keep going. Okay, this is the one I want you to look at. This is the view up our street. Next time a contest is sponsored that asks, show us your view of your beautiful hometown, that's our view. Seriously, I know there is, as always, talk about costs to the taxpayers. I will tell you this area deserves some attention. It seems ridiculous to fix Maple, tear up Florence, and not fix these problems. It is obvious that this street has been ignored for quite some time. This did not get this way overnight. While the brick streets were being taken care of and methodically preserved, and newer area of Downers Grove were getting beautification, Florence was ignored or forgotten. The people of Florence are hardworking taxpayer residents, and while they may not have been as vocal and demanding as other areas of town, that doesn't mean they don't deserve some consideration. You'll be hearing from these people on a timely basis, and I'm sorry this went a little bit long, but I thought I'm going to speak for a couple people. Thank you for your time, and we hope to hear from you with a favorable response, and I have copies of the petitions that everyone on this street who pays taxes signed and are in favor of. So, just pass those around. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments, and clearly there's a number of issues going on here. One is the street reconstruction, which obviously the street looks, from my uneducated eye, to probably need to be reconstructed, and that's actually going to happen. The question is, should it be improved beyond just being reconstructed? Should curb and gutter, it looks like a storm sewer system might be, well, to actually address that, you'd have to level out the street and put in a storm sewer too. The short answer is, you're right. The problem is, there's a lot of places in town that would like that treatment. I can tell you, I lived on one for 10 years. Some of those photos you showed me look like my block. 4800, 4900 block of Cornell doesn't quite look as bad, but when the street was redone, they did the same thing. The question was asked, well, can we put in both sidewalks on both sides? Can we put in curb and gutter, and other improvements? And the short question is that if you have to do it in one place, you have to do it in every place. That we can't just take Florence and do it there, or take Cornell and do it there, or do it somewhere else. It has to be a village-wide policy. And you ask a fair question, maybe that's something as a community we should look at. Should we look at raising and then allocating the significant dollars necessary to not just fix your segment of Florence, but the entire village? That's a community conversation, and it's one that I think we're all prepared to have. But then, much like the sidewalk matrix, we'd have to look at what the long-term costs were. This would not be something that would happen over a matter of weeks. It would happen over decades. The sidewalk matrix took 20 years to get it to where it is today. We could come up with a similar type of matrix for curb and gutter throughout the entire community. It is a question. The way Downers Grove developed over time, I mean, it's obviously a community that's been around since 1832. They didn't have curb and gutter back then. I think one of the first roads that they talked about at Founder's Day was improved by taking a large log and putting it on ropes behind a horse, and they dragged it through the street. That was their idea of improving the street back then. And different pockets of Downers Grove have developed at different points in time, and so you'll go to some places where there's no curb and gutter, there's other places where there are curb and gutter. There's parts of town where they don't want curb and gutter, or they don't want sidewalks because it has a more rural feel. It's really a community conversation, and the dollars are not just significant for purposes of Florence Avenue, but it's really what is the cost of that entire policy. And a fair question to have, if that's what the community would like to have a conversation about and talk about what would be involved in doing that. It's a community decision, and that's something that the council certainly will reflect. One thing I may throw out just for consideration, and you don't have to answer this now, but since there's obviously a lot of people in your neighborhood that are very interested in possibly improving the street, because this was actually offered to the residents of the 4800 and 4900 block of Cornell a number of years ago when a very similar situation was presented, was we do have a policy, and maybe this was shared with you, about the neighborhood creating an SSA, or special service area. What it would allow is, as part of a project, if the village policy is going to do this much, and the neighborhood would like more, there is an ability to do that through basically private funding. There's a special service area where the neighborhood imposes upon itself an additional levy over a long period of time that will pay for those improvements. We have a policy that exists that allows the neighborhood to basically vote on it. I don't remember what the percentage is, but I believe it's a supermajority of the neighborhood has to be in favor of it. And if they are, then that is possible. That's the current policy. I know that in the situation where my neighborhood did that a number of years ago, ultimately there weren't enough people in support of it. They wanted it, but didn't want to undertake the additional expense. You know, fair point, people can disagree on that point. So the street was reconstructed without curb and gutter. And to this day, the street was redone, but there's gravel along the road, there are culverts, there are pipes. I have to confess, some of yours are a little bit mangier looking than the ones that we were looking at, but very similar type of layout. And the issue again is there are numerous parts of town that are just like that. And so the solution here, if we were going to do curb and gutter throughout the entire community, was to talk about doing curb and gutter throughout the entire community and what would be involved in doing that. I mean, that would be the only fair and equitable thing to do. But it's certainly a conversation we can have. In the meantime, I go back to the suggestion about considering an SSA, because that could take care of it more immediately.
Mayor, is that, just a question for you, is that how the brick streets are maintained through, is there an SSA for the brick streets anymore?
No, then that's probably topic of a different conversation. There was a discussion on, when was that, 2007? 2007, there was a conversation about whether the brick streets should be continued with an SSA, and the decision at that point in time by the majority of the council was that there should not be an SSA, that it was a community value issue that should be maintained by the community.
Was there at one time an SSA?
Yes, a couple, Prince Pond area and a couple streets west of that.
Yes.
Okay.
That was the decision.
In 2007. Thank you for that clarification.
So anyway, I apologize for not responding to you previously. I just noticed, I thought there had been a response on behalf of the council, and apparently I was mistaken. So that would have been my response.
I have a brief question about that too.
Sure.
Is there a contract in place to resurface the street?
Has that gone out to bid yet?
No, it is not yet.
Okay, so this
So the
hasn't...
answer is no.
Okay, so the village council has not yet voted
Correct.
to fund the Maple project, the Maple Village project.
It's budgeted, but the contract award has not come forward to this council yet.
Okay.
So the SSA concept could work under the current policy?
I just want to find out if any decisions have been made already. I mean...
No.
But by the council voting? No. Okay, that'll come forward in the future.
And thank you for sharing your comments.
Can I just say, it just seems silly to tear up the street, and we have some safety issues on the streets. If you came and saw these things, you would never let your little kids, or anyone in your family, say, my mother tumbled down into a culvert, you know?
Yeah. And very, very sorry to hear that, and I understand completely. Again, I know firsthand because I lived on a street like that for 10 years. Culverts, gully,
It's
everything.
a shame as we have it all torn up to fix it and start over.
That was exactly the sentiment on my block, but that was the policy was in place, and the neighborhood was not willing to make the additional investment to upgrade it beyond what the village policy provided. So what the solution or the possible solution would be to change the policy, but it would have to be,
Although it's being bent for Maple Avenue, because there's no curves on Maple Avenue. Just so you know.
yep, understood.
Okay, I'm just saying, it makes no sense, we live on that street, we
Right.
want it fixed, that's mostly businesses and just kind of,
Right.
you know, uncurved streets there, and for some reason that was kind of my point, is if it can be bent for certain things, there's safety issues here.
No, my guess is because of the nature of Maple Avenue as a different type of street, but I can get that answer later.
That's fine.
I won't guess as I sit up here.
That's okay.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi. B. Bennett. I wanted to thank the commissioners for coming out to the Public Works event a week ago, 2 weeks ago. Anyway, I was disappointed in that event. I thought it was going to be a public discussion for our neighborhood, and it wasn't. It was the same dog and pony show that we have seen time and time again. In fact, the last time I stood up in front of the council, I asked for a microphone for a hearing, so we could talk, not just listen, where we could get answers and give our opinions. And I could hear what other people in my neighborhood feel about this great redo in Clyde Estates. And I even suggested that we might use Village Hall because it's a nice facility. Anyway, when I went to Public Works, I didn't get a microphone. I didn't get to hear what my neighbors said. I walked in, and right there in the lobby, somebody greeted us, and they said, "We have blanks, comment sheets. Fill them out, please, and we'll read them later." Well, you don't get to hear written comments. You don't hear those. They're silent. So where was this discussion? And as I heard at this first meeting, after people had gotten up and expressed their concerns over this very earth-moving plan for our well-established neighborhood, the person who was conducting it, who was a director or an associate director, he said, "Well, that was interesting," or thereabouts, "but it's going to happen." And I don't think it should happen. It's a bad plan. And this gal, I didn't catch her name, but she nailed it. I went out and I bought a camera, a digital camera, and I got very concerned about what the ditches are going to look like, what retention ponds look like in this town. And I didn't bring them tonight because they're a gift to you later. But anyway, it's a progress. It's not worthy of your time or my time. It's something that should be stopped right now, and we should have a healthy discussion, not a dog and pony show. We should have pictures and input from the people, because I think all of you have a responsibility. I think you're where you are because you want to serve the community, not just buy into what's being proposed. So that's what I wanted to say, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Thanks for your comments. Other questions or comments of a general nature? Good evening.
Hi, Marge Earl, 4720 Florence Avenue, just down the block from you. Have lived there pushing 25 years now, both sides of the street, 4720 and then 4721. But I've never experienced the same problem with the ditches. I'm not saying that you don't have a problem with the ditches. They're different in different areas. The ditches get steeper as they get towards the lower parts of the street. And, but one of the reasons I moved to the neighborhood I moved to, just like Clyde Estates, it has no curb and gutter. It has ditches, and it's much more rural. I started coming to this public meetings, this whole body, in 2007, when you were putting the sidewalk in my neighborhood, which I did not want. But I got the sidewalk, and we've learned to live with it. It's still not my ideal, but I like the rural feel of my neighborhood, and there are definitely areas of Downers Grove where you want that rural feel. That's why people move there. But when you have a difficult life accident, like with your mother in the ditches, and when the bottom of these ditches are so steep, and instead of them maybe being surfaced with something smooth that would convey the water, you've got rocks, which these rocks are sharp. They're not rounded river rock boulders, they're sharp rocks. So I can understand her dismay and her worry with this. And Florence Avenue's got a great elevation difference, depending on which end of it you're at. And, but it's definite that the higher end is Maple Avenue, and it really should be looked at. And I think, especially between Maple and the railroad tracks, something definitely needs to be done, because at least my end of the street a couple of years ago got resurfaced. So thanks for your time.
Thank you. And what I omitted to say earlier is certainly with respect to the street reconstruction progress, regardless of whether curb and gutter goes in, certainly in the work that's done in the right of way, if there are things that can be done to ameliorate that situation, certainly that can be part of the project at a minimum. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't look at that. Other questions or comments of a general nature from members of the audience? Terrific, thank you. Well, I appreciate you sharing everything with us tonight. Bless you. And then brings us to item 9, which is reserved for public hearings. We do have a public hearing tonight. This is with respect to an annexation agreement. So I will begin by calling this public hearing to order. This public hearing has been called by the Village Council to consider a proposed annexation agreement for the property located at 502 Hitchcock Avenue. Notice that this hearing was published in the Downers Grove Suburban Life on April 14th, 2015. I would like to summarize the procedures which we will follow for tonight's public hearing, lest we've all forgotten. Number 1, I will ask the manager to summarize the annexation agreement and identify the property involved. Second, I will ask any representatives of the owner who may be present this evening to make a brief presentation regarding the annexation agreement or the property involved. Third, the Village Council will thereafter have the opportunity to ask questions or make comments. Next, members of the public will be offered an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment regarding the petition. Statements, just so you know, may be presented for the record, either written or oral, and any petitions or other documents or information relevant to this public hearing may be submitted at this time. Thereafter, we will adjourn the hearing. Please note that at this hearing, witnesses will not be sworn, and a verbatim written transcript of the statements or testimony given at the hearing will not be prepared. However, a recording of the proceedings will be made on village equipment and retained until the minutes of the hearing have been prepared and approved by the Village Council. The proposed agreement will be placed on public file, and if authorized by the Village Council, approval scheduled for a future agenda. At this point in time, I would ask the village manager, pursuant to the rigid procedures I just related to everyone, to summarize the proposal or designate someone else on our fine staff to do so.
Well, I hope they're not too rigid, because I'm not giving tonight's presentation. I'm going to hand it over to our planning manager, Stan Popovich.
I just read the script. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Tonight, as you noticed, the public hearing is for the annexation agreement of 502 Hitchcock Avenue. I will also be discussing at the same time items 12A, B, and C, which are the annexation agreement for this property, the voluntary annexation, and then the rezoning for this property. So I'll go over all the project together here to give you a full scope of that. So if there's any questions on any of those 3 items here, I can answer those at this time as well. As we noted, this is a public hearing for the annexation agreement, and we'll discuss the voluntary annexation and rezoning. The property is on the far west side of the village on Hitchcock Avenue, here shown in the yellow circle, just west of our Downers Grove Public Works facility. The property is currently shown here in the green. It is currently operating as a truck and transportation terminal, a towing facility in unincorporated Downers Grove through DuPage County zoning requirements. This is a picture, shows some of the current conditions here, and then the map on the right-hand side shows in the line is the village existing boundary. The shaded in blue area is the part of the village, and then the property you can see here outlined in green is just outside of the village's boundary. If the property is not very improved very much and it doesn't meet current village standards, hence the requirement for the annexation agreement to ensure that the property is improved to meet village standards. And the property is contiguous, so that falls into the annexation allowance. The petitioner is proposing to improve the property by adding green space, shown in green here, pave the parking lot, reorient the driveway, create a new curb cut, and add public improvements, including sidewalk in front of the property, curb and gutter, construct a single curb cut, connect to the water main, and install a septic system as well. So to ensure compliance and completion of these required improvements, the village is entering into an annexation agreement with the property owner. The annexation agreement basically covers these key things here: connection to the water system, septic system, add fire protection to the building, improve the property, and install public improvements. And so all of these annexation agreement are listed within the annexation agreement, and the agreement notes that it's got to be completed within 6 months. So upon annexation, they'll have 6 months to complete all the work to make these improvements to bring the property up to village standards. With regard to the rezoning, again, the property here is in the westernmost part of the village, just outside the Ellsworth Industrial Park, or within the Ellsworth Industrial Park. The petitioner is requesting a rezoning from R1, which is when an annexed property comes in, it's automatically zoned to R1, which is the strictest zoning classification in the village. Petitioner is requesting an M1 classification, which is shown here in the light blue, which is predominantly throughout the Ellsworth Industrial Park. And then the purple areas are the office, research, manufacturing, which we have scattered throughout the Ellsworth Industrial Park as well. The truck and transportation terminal, which the use would fall underneath, is a permitted use within the M1 zoning district. So the use would be a permitted use once the rezoning would come into play. In an R1 classification, that would not be a permitted use, hence the rezoning request. The proposed rezoning meets the approval standards listed in the zoning ordinance, section 12.030.I for rezoning. The request for rezoning to M1 is consistent with nearby zoning uses as shown in the previous slide. It will not affect property values, and the property is suitable for the proposed use. Additionally, the proposal to rezone is consistent with the comprehensive plan. The area at Ellsworth Industrial Park is designated as light industrial or business park. There are similar surrounding uses, and the comp plan also calls for continued enhancements to the buildings and properties within the Ellsworth Industrial Park. If there's any questions at this time, I'd be happy to answer this for you.
Well, before we come to that, I need to stick to the script here. So I'm first going to ask if there's any statement by representatives of the owner at this time. And then we'll go to questions.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Ken Rafferty, Rafferty Planning
Mr.
Services. I'm here with John and Bobby Pemberton, who are the owners of the property. Property is currently characterized as having an address of 502 Hitchcock. Upon annexation, it will follow along with the Downers Grove street numbering system and take an address of 2860. Mr. Popovich completely described well what we're intending to do. Our 25,000 square foot property is improved with about a 3,600 square foot building. The property was fully improved while in DuPage County. It was improved consistent with the DuPage County zoning ordinances. One of the interesting things that we discovered when we did our due diligence as part of the purchase was that as part of the 1985 comprehensive rezoning of DuPage County, the county erred and assumed that this piece of property was part of the north-south tollway right-of-way, and therefore gave it the same zoning as the north-south tollway right-of-way. If it had been properly identified by the county staff, it would probably carry either a county I-1 light industrial or I-2. Looking at the ordinance, I think it would be I-1. The county acknowledged that this is fully legal nonconforming, and there's a letter in the documentation, and that's why the petitioner is able to operate in the property now. They could continue on, but they do want to come into Downers Grove. This is not a matter of, a desperation or necessity. They want to come in. So they voluntarily signed the annexation agreement, which the village staff prepared, which will provide for connection of water, sanitation management, paving, curbs and gutters of the streets, sidewalks, fire alarm system. They've already paid their fees to compensate for the annexation from the Fire Protection District, and they have installed temporary washroom and drinking water facilities. Currently, the garage works not dissimilar to the village's parking garage. People park their vehicles and go away. They don't spend any time there. Pemberton's own fire towing. They own a fleet of 6 of the very expensive high-tech tow trucks, and they need to be kept indoors both summer and winter. The modern tow truck has many computers on them, and the weather is not one of the best things for them, so they need to be protected. We held a neighborhood meeting on February the 19th and provided a narrative to all the surrounding property owners. The only respondent we received was via telephone call from Ned Lopata, who owns many of the buildings in the Ellsworth Park industrial area, and particularly the building to the east of it, and he was very supportive of our petition. We received a positive recommendation, a vote of 6-0 from the Plan Commission, and we would hope that the Village Council would agree with the Plan Commission and execute the annexation agreement, the petition for rezoning, and the petition for annexation. I want to thank the staff very much for all their help they provided for my client. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them for you now.
Thank you, Mr. Rathje. And now we'll move on to, are there any questions or comments from members of the Village Council with respect to this annexation agreement, either for our village staff or for the petition? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Let's point out that we are going to be hearing more about this under item 12 as our first reading, or we may be revisiting it briefly. Seeing there are no questions, are there any questions or comments from members of the public with respect to this annexation agreement, either for the petitioner or for village staff? Hearing none, I will now adjourn this public hearing. Although we will be hearing more about it, as I mentioned, on item 12, as these items are under our first reading. That brings us to item 10 on our agenda tonight, which is our consent agenda. And there is an item that is been separated off the consent agenda tonight. So item 10C, as in Charlie, has been removed at the request of the village council member off the consent agenda for separate treatment. So I will ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda absent item 10C.
Mayor Tully, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented with the exception of item 10C.
And I second the motion that was just made.
Are there any questions or comments from members of the village council on the consent agenda items absent item 10C as in Charlie? Are there any questions or comments from any members of the village, any members of the audience with respect to the consent agenda items other than item 10C? Hearing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Vitimo?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the consent agenda without item 10C has been approved unanimously. That brings us to our active agenda, item 11. We had no items under the active agenda, but now we do. We now have what was formerly item 10C. We'll now take up under item 11 our active agenda. Is there a motion to award a contract for $99,530 to Misfits Construction Company, Chicago, Illinois, for the 55th and Grand Head Wall Replacement Project?
Mayor Tully, I move that that the village council award a contract for the 55th and Grand Head Wall Replacement Project to Misfits Construction Company of Chicago, Illinois, in the amount of $99,530.
And I second the motion that was just presented.
Are there any questions or comments from members of the village council with respect to this item? Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. I ask that this item be removed from the consent agenda, not because I have a problem with the project necessarily, because I want to make it clear that I think this is a project that should go forward. That said, I have a bit of a problem with our policy when it comes to awarding these contracts. It came to my attention through reading through the packet and talking with staff that one of our requirements for going forward with a project like this and awarding a contract does not include that the entity receiving the award be a participant in a U.S. Department of Labor approved Bureau of Apprenticeship Bureau of Apprenticeship and Training approved program. And I think that should be a part of our policy. I wanted to remove the item in order to make that statement. I am going to vote no on the project, hoping that this will spur additional conversation among my colleagues and perhaps a change in the policy in the future. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from members of the Village Council? I'll just add that I understand the basis for Commissioner Jose's position, although it's not currently a requirement, therefore, in my opinion, no reason to deny the award of the contract to the lowest responsible bidder. So I will be supporting it. Questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to this item? Hearing none, I'll ask for a roll call on this item, please.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Fatimo? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Nay.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the matter passes 6-1. That brings us to the end of our active agenda, and on item 12, our first reading or our workshop agenda, where items are presented for discussion and consideration purposes only. There's no action taken at this time, but possibly at a future council meeting. As was mentioned, I believe most, if not all, of these items related to the same subject matter as the public hearing. As the custom dictates, although not as rigidly, at this point, the village manager or its designee will introduce the items on the first reading or workshop agenda for our consideration.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. The first three items, A, B, and C, were previously presented by Planning Manager Stan Popovich. We have no further presentation at this time. Of course, if there's any additional questions or comments, we're happy to entertain them at this time.
Thank you. And I know you're all holding your questions until this part of the agenda. Are there any questions or comments from the village council at this stage? No questions or comments from members of the audience?
Thank you, Mayor. We'll move on to item D, which is the proposed award of contract to J.A. Johnson Paving regarding our resurfacing of streets project, and this will be presented by our Assistant Director of Public Works, Andy Sikich.
Good evening, Mr. Sikich.
Good evening, Mayor, Village Council. The item before you tonight is a contract with J.A. Johnson Paving for our 2015 resurfacing project in the amount of $2,497,116.88. Resurfacing is the largest part of our annual road maintenance program. We will be resurfacing streets. Hold on a second while I do the soft shoe. We have a map of the streets we will be surfacing this year and a list. Here's a large map that you probably can't see. So we've blown it up. These are the streets that will be resurfaced this year. They are, of course, bundled together to try and get the best bang for our buck into several different locations around the village. We also have a list, which is our next slide, and these are the streets by block that will be resurfaced this year. Call for bids was issued in accordance with our purchasing policy. 3 bids were received, and J.A. Johnson Paving was the low responsible bidder. They have satisfactorily completed projects for the village of Winfield and the city of Batavia. If there's any questions, I could take those now.
Any questions or comments on this item from members of the village council? Questions or comments from members of the audience? Please, Ms. Bennett. If I could ask you to make your way down. Otherwise, the folks at home won't hear you.
Ms. Bennett had asked if Clyde Avenue is on that list. The answer is no, or Clyde Drive, excuse me.
It is not on the list.
It is not. The Clyde Avenue, Clyde Drive project as part of Clyde Estates is under a different contract.
And that's not on the agenda tonight. Yes, it is.
I'm sorry. This is part of the reason why we need you to come down here, ma'am. I'm sorry. This is one of those rare occasions where I get to say I can't hear you.
And I can't read that.
Fair enough.
If I heard this right, Clyde Drive is not on that list.
That's what I just heard, yes.
Okay. That's fine. Is it on any other agenda tonight?
No.
Approval agenda?
No.
That's very good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming down to the podium. Any other questions or comments from members of the audience? Hearing none, next item.
Next item is a consideration of an award of contract for improvements to parking lot H. And our Public Works Director, Nan Newland, will provide additional background information on this item.
Good evening.
Good evening.
A motion is requested to award a contract for parking lot H improvements to Key Construction LLC of Chicago, Illinois, in the amount of $1,401,586.72, which includes a 1.5% in contingency amount. Lot H is located here, as shown in red on this exhibit, next to the Belmont train station. It is right along the south platforms of the Belmont station, the southwest corner of Belmont Road and the Burlington Northern Railroad tracks. It has 345 commuter parking spaces. The project will include the removal and replacement of the pavement, curbs and gutter, storm sewers, lighting, sidewalks, and landscaping throughout this parking lot. This contract, $500,000 of the cost of the contract was included in the fiscal year 2015 Community Investment Plan from the Parking Fund. The remaining amount of $903,311 will be contributed by Metra through a grant. I just wanted to show you a couple of pictures showing the pavement condition of this parking lot. It's significantly failed, and we have been patching it through the last couple of years. We got through the Belmont underpass construction. There was construction that happened in this lot, and as well as we started the Main Street platform reconstruction last year. We were concerned about parking displacement from that project, so we held off another year, so we're getting to the project this year. And the pavement shows that it's in quite a bit of distress. The plan is to construct this project in one phase and to relocate the commuters to alternative parking locations. The benefit of a single phase of construction is it is a shorter time frame. It would be about 12 weeks of time in lieu of 16 weeks, which would be required if it was a two-phase construction. A side benefit of that is it can be timed over the summer, which has quite a bit less parking demand. A lot of people go on vacations through the summer, and our parking demand is less in the summer. As well as what we experienced when the Belmont construction occurred in Lot H, where we had part of the lot in parking and part in construction. There were conflicts between cars and construction vehicles and pedestrians, and it was a little bit more difficult to manage. This exhibit shows Lot H in green. We've identified temporary parking locations in yellow, and I'm going to show you a few of those in more detail. The accessible parking would be moved from Lot H to the north side on Burlington Avenue here. It would displace some of the commuters in Lot G, and they'd be moved further down into Lot G. We're also planning to lease spaces from two private entities. One of them is Rexnord, which is has parking right off of Chase. We're right now finalizing an agreement with them to be presented to council, as well as discussions with Aerogear, which is off of Curtis, to lease some spaces from them as well. Those two agreements we hope to have to you by the first meeting in June for your consideration. We're also talking to Pace about putting in some temporary bus stops, because some of the alternative parking is farther away from the station than what it currently is, so we'd be looking to provide some temporary spots for people. This, I'll go back to our exhibit here, is at the northeast quadrant, just north of the ramp on the east side of Belmont. It's owned by the village. It's currently has gravel, and the plan is to remove the brush and some old fencing, to level the gravel, probably add some more gravel to make it smooth, and add about 85 additional temporary parking spaces here during the construction. In addition to that, we're looking to add some on-street parking on both Haddow and on Curtis for daily fee people. So we'd be putting up numbers and allowing people to park there. We'd also be promoting the park and ride facility at Belmont and 63rd for commuters coming from the south. This is an example on Haddow where there's some parking available that can be used by commuters over the summer when school's not in session. Work is anticipated to begin on this project the second week of June and be completed by the first week of September. That's with the 12-week one-phase construction. A call for bids was issued, and we received 7 bids. A condition of the federal funding that's provided through Metra is that the bids are to be reviewed and approved by Metra, and upon review, Metra deemed 3 of the bidders, including the low bidder, to be non-responsive because of lack of compliance with the disadvantaged business enterprise requirements that they must adhere to. The lowest responsive bidder is Key Construction LLC, has satisfactorily completed similar projects for the Burr Ridge School District, the Village of Glenview, the Naperville Park District, and the City of Naperville. And staff recommends award of the contract to Key Construction. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions or comments on this item from members of the Village Council? Commissioner Barnett.
Thanks, Mayor. Just to, are the contemplated leases, do we have estimates that we've gone ahead and put into our budgeting for that? So the budget numbers we saw at the beginning, do they include estimates for those leases?
The number you saw is for the contract. It does not include the lease prices.
So if those agreements are put together, is that entirely a village burden, or will there be Metra compensation for that?
That would be a village cost and come from the parking fund.
Okay. And then this is one, if you don't have an answer tonight, certainly that's fine, but that northeast of the ramp area where the existing gravel is, have we done any exploration on using this as an opportunity to, once H is back in service, turn that into an actual full-time lot?
Yes, that could happen. I think at that point, we'd want to pave it, finally
Sure.
pave it. I think at this point, we're looking at more of a temporary solution.
We've got pretty outstanding demand, right? A couple of years of, I think, typically?
Well,
There are some current agreements with Metra on that, back to the Belmont underpass, and some significant restrictions on that. I can pull that and get you that information.
I'd certainly be interested in that, because I think I recall kind of an annual conversation where we've got multiple year demands, including a lot of residents who don't have a place to park. So if we're going to go through the exercise of doing some clearing and leveling, seems like an opportunity maybe.
We'll look into that.
Thanks.
Just to pick up on that, two slightly off-topic questions. One, I know you don't have the answer to this, but if we could get some information from Metra in terms of how ridership has been trending at the Belmont station. So obviously, there was an impact during the construction period, but since it's now been in play for some time, I'd be curious to see what the ridership trends are looking like. I know that they have been steadily increasing at Main Street, but I'd be curious to see what the trends are at that station, because that may weigh into also future discussion points for that, not only that facility, but that corridor.
Will do, Mayor.
And then the other off-topic point is, speaking of the Main Street station, now something like how I work that in. And I don't need this right now, but it just reminded me, we do get questions from time to time about how things are going with that platform reconstruction, the East End reconstruction. I know we had a little bit of a experience with that project that was out of our hands last year. It seems to be going much more swiftly this year than it did last year, but I know a lot of commuters will ask us how that's going, and if we could periodically sort of say it's either on schedule, ahead of schedule, and whatnot.
We will provide regular updates to the council and to the public via our website and other means, as we did last construction season. Looks for the untrained eye so far so good, but we'll get a better report than that shortly.
To this untrained eye, I would agree with you. I know that we're all looking forward to not having to get off at the train in Lyle in order to walk back back to the station.
We'll get
Any questions or comments from the audience with respect to this construction project? And we have one indeed. Good evening.
I don't know it.
Welcome back.
What is the value of this train station to the Downers Grove residents? Is this a commuter's parking lot? Is this some benefit? What is it for us?
The parking lot?
Mhm.
It's commuter parking.
And the commuters are Downers Grove residents, or are they
Both?
Bolingbrook, or? And do we pick up the tab for outsiders to park? I mean, it's off of our tax rolls, so who, are we being the
It's
hostess?
just what, as was just mentioned, we're receiving outside funds for it.
I thought it was a question. How much are we getting out of this? How much is underwritten by somebody else?
So maybe Dan can answer that question. There you go.
The total amount, the village portion is paying from the parking fund, which is, the revenue is from parking, commuter parking, and the rest is from Metra.
And what exactly is the cost to the residents?
It would be $500,000.
No,
$500,000?
well,
Well, that comes out of the parking fund.
yeah, I mean,
From the parking fund, but it's important to understand that the revenues in the parking fund are generated from fees paid by the parkers. So it's the commuters
Yes.
themselves, so.
Right.
It's.
But it comes out of the village budget, which is how I was answering your question. But yes, where those funds come from initially are from people who pay parking fees, which would be a mix of residents and non-residents.
And this property is off the tax rolls, it's Downers Grove land, but we don't really derive any benefit from it.
I don't remember the exact configurations, but my guess it's a mix of Downers Grove and
BNSF.
Railroad BNSF property. Some configure, I'd have to.
Do we get tax dollars from it?
No. My guess is no.
That's too bad.
Parking fees.
But parking fees go back in, they're reinvested into the commuters.
It goes into the parking fund, and the parking fund dollars are spent on parking-related expenses, yes.
So it does not benefit the residents.
Sure it does.
How?
Well, number one, we have 3 metro stations in our downtown. That is one of the reasons why people live here. A lot of people live here because of the easy commute to the city, so that's a huge benefit. It's one of the reasons that many people actually move here in the first place. Number two, the ability to park there, if you live in town, is also a benefit.
The village
There's also
park?
benefits with, there's all the benefits that transit-oriented parking and access would have for any community. I know a lot of communities are extremely jealous that we have 3 metro stops in our town.
We're very lucky to have the railroad through
Yes,
our
ma'am.
town. In fact, the town might not exist without it.
I wouldn't even pretend to speculate, but
We don't need to go there. Okay, so it's not a direct benefit other than the people who buy property in Downers Grove because of the trains.
I wouldn't also speculate on what impact it has on property values, having that facility in our town as opposed to not. I don't know.
All right, well, thank you.
But my untrained eye would suggest that it probably does add value. Any other questions or comments from members of the audience? Any final questions from members of the village council, even with the detours? All right, thank you for the presentation.
And that ends our first reading tonight, Mayor.
Terrific, thank you. That brings us to item 13, which is the mayor's report. One thing I just want to point out is that DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference is having their annual Springfield Drive Down tomorrow, and the timing couldn't be, what I mean by the drive down is there's a number of mayors and managers and trustees from a number of different communities in DuPage County that are going down to Springfield to bend the ear of our representatives in the General Assembly on a variety of issues. And the timing couldn't be better or worse, depending on how you look at it. Last week, I'm sure many will know that the Illinois Supreme Court ruled as unconstitutional Senate Bill 1, which was the first effort to try to achieve some pension reform in the state of Illinois. It did not affect public safety employee pension funds, which are most impactful upon municipalities, but it was widely looked at as a litmus test as to whether or not certain preferred methods of achieving some reform could be accomplished. The Supreme Court of Illinois said unanimously no, go back to the drawing board. So there are going to be discussions, no doubt, this week about what those go back to the drawing board options might be. And then more recently, yesterday, there were some amendments that were filed to a number of House bills, the gist of which would be to implement a property tax freeze starting in tax levy year 2015 that would apply to both home rule and non-home rule communities, basically indicating that absent a referendum, property tax levy could not be increased by any community in the state of Illinois. That may sound really good on its face, except without pension reform, the increasing costs of having to fund those pensions and the threats to our municipal revenue, such as the discussion or the option of potentially taking up to 50% of our municipal share of the state income tax, means dollars are going away and our options to respond to those reductions in revenue are becoming more limited. No one wants to raise property taxes, but if you either replace the revenue with something or you make further cuts to your organization. And those, including Commissioner Barnett, will remember very clearly the type of cuts that had to be made in 2010 in the face of about $2.3, $2.4 million in revenue due to plummeting sales taxes at that time, which has since improved a fair amount. But we're sort of in it's not a single whammy, a double whammy, but a triple whammy situation. So it should be a very interesting conversation in Springfield this week. And I'll look forward to reporting back to all of you on that gleeful conversation. A lot of things going on. So this is a preface to the report, and hopefully next week or the next meeting, I'll have some more to report on what was said. Stay tuned. That's all I have for my report tonight. It brings us to item 14, the manager's report.
No report tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fieldman. Item 15, attorney's report. Ms. Petrarca.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 items to present this evening. The first is an ordinance annexing 502 Hitchcock Avenue to the Village of Downers Grove, and an ordinance rezoning certain property located at 502 Hitchcock Avenue. That is all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. We already had public comment, item 16, earlier tonight, so we'll jump to council member new business, then we'll come back to the council retreat, which is going to take place next door. So item 17 will be held next door. What we will do is we will have council member new business here, if any. Then we will adjourn to the committee room next door and pick up with the council retreat. Just to lay the foundation for what that is with obviously a newly seated council. One of the things that we thought was very important for us as a group, as a new team, to get together and talk about, for lack of a better word, how we will interact with each other, how we will interact with village staff, and how we will interact with the public. As I think I mentioned last week, this is a very diverse council in terms of its experience, its perspectives, and what councils they may have served on in the past. And some have only experienced certain ways of doing things. Some have experienced multiple ways of doing things. Some haven't experienced any way of doing things yet. And so we're going to get together and talk about how this council for the next 2 years wants to conduct itself in the best interest of the community. So that's what will be taking place next door. It will, of course, be public and televised like everything else that we do. But for now, let's wrap up what we have in terms of business here, and that would only be item 18. Do any members of the village council have any items of new business that they would like to share with their colleagues at this point in time? Hearing none, I will ask I guess I don't have to ask for a motion to adjourn. I'll do that next door. I will declare that we are adjourned to the committee room for the council retreat discussion that I just described. For those watching for right now, we will have a short break and we'll be back on air very soon. Thank you. The tenure of this new council, about as early as we could do it, so I appreciate everyone arranging their schedules so that we could do it. Just so happens we're all here anyway. That worked out well. As mentioned, the purpose of this is for us to talk about, for lack of a better word, rules of engagement, how we engage one another, how we engage village staff, and how we engage the public so that this council can work well together. This isn't necessarily about establishing rules, although I use that term. It's more about having a common set of expectations about how we will interact going forward. And I think that will make us a more productive body for doing the good work of the people and making sure that we take care of the big things, which is very important. So with that introduction, I will defer, as I always do, to our outstanding village manager, Mr. Fieldman, who is the master of the props. So I will let you start from there. David?
First of all, we're working from a handout. For those of you in the room, there's some information right here you can follow along with us. As the mayor said, we're just talking about how we operate as a team, council, community, and staff team. And it's based on the idea of understanding the roles and responsibilities of each of the team members, how our interactions are structured. That is, typically, what do our council meeting agendas look like? What do our standing committee agendas look like? How are they structured? And then probably the most important thing on this list of how we roll, what are the expectations we have of each other as part of this community and village team as we go about playing our roles and responsibilities and as we go about working within the meeting structure that we set up. So that's all well and good, but that's not very concrete of an exercise to talk about it in the abstract. So what we'd like to do tonight is work through three typical types of meetings that we have as a council, staff, and community team, starting with council meetings, because that's one of our primary meetings that we have right now 3 times per month throughout the year, and go through a series of questions and identify the practices we currently use, why we use these practices, and then have a discussion about what seems to be working and what are some things we'd like to change. And again, it's not so much about coming to a specific set of rules or consensus tonight, but understanding the preferences of each of our teammates so that we can make better decisions that are cognizant of our teammates' preferences as we roll along. So I think the first question that we had identified that might get us started is, what are the council members' expectations of performance? Or what's the definition of success of a council meeting? Basically, I know it's a great council meeting when, or here are the attributes of a great council meeting. Just to start us off, and then we can hopefully have everybody weigh in on that, and then we can move through to some of the more detailed aspects. So I'll just throw it back to you, Mayor.
Well, sure. Well, without question, my definition of a great village council meeting is when everyone agrees with me. Seriously, I've often thought that a successful village council meeting, whether the issue is one that is seemingly pedestrian or extremely complex, is one where everyone comes to the meeting well informed of the issue. In other words, have sort of done their homework in advance. We have a meeting where the aspects of the issue are clearly and simply explained such that the public can also understand the important points of the issue. We have a conversation where even if there are differences of opinion, everyone is heard and understood as to where they're coming from. There is a further, and that conversation extends, of course, to the public as well, recognizing that there will oftentimes, particularly when there's a particularly complex issue, be a divergence of opinions, that all opinions are understood, they are heard, they are considered. Of course, they can't all be adopted because that's impossible, but at least they're respected. If possible, some consensus is reached in terms of, is there a, we like to call it the and solution. Can we come to a resolution that actually addresses everybody's viewpoints? And if not, can we at least come to a consensus of a decision that everyone will understand how we got there? They may not necessarily agree with the outcome, but they'll feel that the issue was explained, that they were heard, views were considered, and even if the outcome was not their preference, it's one that they will respect and appreciate the process by which it was arrived at. And that's probably a more narrow answer than what you're looking for. You're talking about a meeting where I was focused more on issues, but most meetings are made up of a series of issues. I'll start with that.
Mayor, could I build off some thoughts that you raised and prompted me to think about was the issue of the public having the opportunity both to pose questions and whether those questions be ones that are answered directly that evening or pose questions that may have to be researched and require some outreach from staff or village council members at a later time. The public having an opportunity to both ask questions and to be heard both on general items and items specifically on the agenda. I mean, it's clearly, I know it's something we do every meeting, the general comment, and we allow the public to speak. There's an opportunity for public comment on each and every agenda item. And I think that ability for the public to address both general issues that may not be on the agenda, in addition to specific issues that are on the agenda, both from making statements, sharing opinions, or sharing their perspectives, or asking questions is one of the things that's really very, very important to me as a council member.
Other thoughts? Bob, what makes a great council meeting for you?
I think you got it covered, Mayor.
Oh, first I'm thinking about what else wants to jump in there. When we talk about all viewpoints being considered and respected and being able to disagree in a civil, professional manner, I want to point out that my understanding of strategic issues requires that there be no obvious solution in the beginning. If there is an obvious solution, it's not a strategic issue. Also, strategic issues require that some conflict or tension be resolved. Therefore, everything that we do is simply going to be, well, either we all know exactly what to do and there's nothing to talk about because the answer is obvious, or we exist to resolve issues that don't have an obvious answer and which require balancing conflicting points of view. Therefore, a respectful appreciation of different points of view is what we're supposed to do. Because if all 7 of us agreed, we wouldn't need 7 of us, we'd have 1. If everyone agreed with Martin and everything, he could just put me by himself. He could be dictator for life and everything would be great.
Not the life part, yeah, not the life part.
But actually, the American system of government is founded on the premise that people do disagree about the most significant of issues. And we have government as a process to solve those. So our job is to solve issues on which people do reasonably disagree. If we don't disagree, we want to deliberate. If we do disagree, that's why we deliberate. So I think it's especially important that every view be allowed to have a respectful hearing at the table. And to add on that, what I'm going to try to push people to do is do what is known as interest-based bargaining rather than position-based bargaining, which means that everybody puts the cards on the table as to what their ultimate goal or objective is. That way we can harmonize those goals and objectives to the maximum extent possible. And that way then all 7 of us, the entire community coming from different perspectives and different agendas can truly collaborate to be one community. That we're one town. And the finally I want to say a little speech here is my opinion Downers Grove is a truly blessed community for a lot of reasons that none of us can take any credit for. And because of that, there's no reason for us to be divided because we have so many advantages that other communities don't have that we can't take credit for. So therefore, we accept that reality. We work together to strengthen our community. We solve our problems. And what we used to say was on the District 99 school board, the school board meetings are supposed to be boring. It's in the Geneva Convention. We're supposed to solve our disputes calmly, civilly, reach agreement, and move on.
I'll just, well said. I'll just pick up on that because I've often said that village council meetings should not be entertaining. It should not be e-news. It should be C-SPAN. If they come entertaining, then we're doing something wrong. What I mean by entertaining is in the reality TV entertaining.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that.
Absolutely.
The only thing I would add to what's been said is that, and this I think is kind of in line with what Commissioner White just said, the procedure is great, but to me, the definition of success is making sure that we're taking the long view, that we're making good policy not just for now, but for 20, 30, 40 years from now. And making sure that we're not thinking simply about short-term political concerns or anything like that. We've prided ourselves on the and solution and on taking all viewpoints into account. I think we have done that. We'll continue to do that. But I think that's important. It's not simply the process for getting there. That is important, but we want to make good policy as a result of that process.
Pick up on Greg's comment. The one thing that's a little bit difficult about defining a great village council meeting, I think, is that at least in recent history, that process is not sort of exclusive to itself, a strange way of putting it, but much of that boring nature, that respectful hearing, that interest-based approach happens as a function of a year-long series of additional meetings, including particular long-range planning. And that, I think, is important because it does, to Greg's point, give you an opportunity to integrate into your day-in, day-out decisions some long view, some long left margin kind of goals that tend to drive some of the decision-making that happens at council. I think that's a pretty important thing. So I guess the long-winded way of saying I think it's important council meeting success is not defined only within the context of Tuesday nights.
And one thing I just want to add So I agree with the long view and that, and I think that it's important that in order to facilitate these decisions, that we are respectful and mindful of process and of the deliberative process that's outlined in our council rules, Robert's Rules of Order, that make it a more deliberative process. And I think that's something that's important.
Process is important because, to just pick up on a few things that others have said, and then I want to make sure that Bill and Gina have an opportunity to jump in here. Process and the long view is what makes stuff boring because it's predictable. If you have a process that you know, if you follow a formula, not to think that we should be closed-minded, not creative, but if you have a predictable process that is followed, then the results should not be surprising to anybody. And that's why we always talk about staying on topic and following a good process. And one of the things I know that we want to talk about is whether we ought to inject some more process into our meetings, not to make them overly formalistic, but to bring some more process to the dais in terms of the way meetings are conducted. We loosely follow Robert's rules. Should we follow them a little bit more closely to provide some more structure and framework to them, again, increasing the process and the predictability, at least in terms of how things are going to proceed. I'll just throw out a couple more things and I'll stop talking, because they just occurred to me. Things that I think are important to a good council meeting are when we stay on topic, when we focus on issues and not people, and even though this is post-meeting, that when a decision is made, it is the decision of the council. The council stays behind it, even if it was a 4-3 vote. Bill? Thoughts?
Oh, a little more down to earth than the 30,000 foot. I think preparation and the way we prepare for meetings is probably most important. And this goes not just to the phone calls and preparation of agenda and that type of thing, but I mean the things that educate the commissioners that we kind of lost track of since I first started. And that gets into standing committees. It wasn't just the standing committee solving a problem, but it was also an educational process. For example, if you're in Public Works, on that standing committee, you're learning about the trees, you're learning about, the infrastructure and that, if you're on Finance and Administration. So we just take advantage of the overall education. Also informing the public, helping them to learn what's happening at the meetings. So when they show up for the first or second time, they can kind of follow along with what's going on. Transparency. I think, for example, in tonight's meeting, there were a number of terms that are thrown out there that we know, but if you're entirely new or if you're in the audience, you really don't follow along. So try to keep things more, pardon the expression, pedestrian. Let's see. Educated counsel, yeah. And then following the process, I agree, we need a little more. I agree with David on the little more strict adherence to Robert's rules. And I know I kind of debate back and forth because after we've had many meetings that we thought, you look at the agenda and you think, half hour. And you wind up getting out at 10 o'clock because somewhere in the discussion, something new came up and you have a discussion on the something new. And I certainly don't have a problem with that. But it needs to be, rather than shutting off conversation, I don't know how you address going off track. I don't mind going off track because that's part of a learning process. So I don't know how you keep order and allow the stream of conscience, I guess, that might take place.
We empower the parliamentarian with the ability to levy fines for those who violate. That's how we stand.
Of which is covered by the mayor by the extra, okay.
I'll be the first violator. Judy, have thoughts?
You know, everyone has said some really good things, and for me, because I'm so new, I think, you know, respecting each other is really important, respecting the public, you know, when they do come up to speak, I think is really important. Listening to what they have to say, you know, having an agenda and sticking to it, I think is important. Yeah.
Well, and on that point of the agenda, having an agenda, topics that is very clear so that a member of the public can log onto our website and look at it or post it on the door or wherever it's posted. But somebody can look at the agenda and say, is this item going to be on the agenda or not going to be on the agenda? And it's very clear to them. And you don't have to necessarily know terminologies. You know, was it a meeting of another public body recently, and there was an item on the agenda that I had no idea what it meant, and I don't think most people in the public knew what that item meant. And so it was very unclear to the public that when that item was discussed, they were actually discussing an item that was of great interest to the public, but the public didn't know that it was being discussed. And, you know, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus with this, but the clarity of the agenda so that people know, is my neighborhood street project going to be discussed at this meeting? Are we going to talk about, you know, a change to the zoning ordinance at this meeting? I think that predictability is important, and that notification, both for ourselves as a council, but also for the public and the people who may be interested in our meetings.
Predictability both for the council and staff, but also for the public.
Absolutely.
In pedestrian, in public terms.
Terms the public can understand.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, we have to be done because I'm out of whiteboard space, Mayor, so.
Well, more importantly, I'm worried about the workers' comp claim from your colleague you're gonna have. Well, there's a lot of stuff up there. We can certainly add to it as needed, unless somebody really wanted to burning desire for Dave to get a different colored pen.
This is extremely helpful from the staff perspective and hearing from each of you about what the expectations are to what success means.
Well, and the other thing I'll just add is I think it's clear agendas should also be complemented by clear outcome/direction, which I think that we do a pretty good job of, or have done a pretty good job of, so that when the discussion is over, again, predictability that there will be an outcome, and everybody knows what the outcome is.
Both the staff,
yes,
the council, and the public
yes,
know what was directed.
Right.
How did we're all on the same page of what the direction was.
Yes.
Right.
Are we putting a kibosh on head nods?
Well, fair question, because that's part of direction, but, you know, how should that be handled? That's a fair question.
I think we can discuss that further.
I think we are going to get to it, but yes. Right,
That's great. So, this is a great way to start. I think we already have a great understanding of how each council member is approaching the council meeting. Now we kind of get into the nuts and bolts. We have many, many processes that are in support of the actual council meetings, and they start before the council meeting actually happens, they go through the council meeting, and they go after the council meeting. Each of these processes and current practices we use today were put in place to achieve certain desired outcomes, and we wanted to go through and make sure and check in. Is this still the right process for this council? Is this still the right mix of desired outcomes? So the council meetings start really, when we start interacting as a staff with the council members, it starts on Friday mornings where members, including myself of the staff, Mike Baker and I sometimes meet with the mayor and mayor pro tem to go through and have a discussion of really a preview of the agenda items, what it might look like. And we do this so that we can create awareness for the mayor and the mayor pro tem, that we can put together the order of the items on the agenda and sometimes move them between council meeting weeks if necessary. But most importantly, we do this so that we can work as a team, so that the people who are in charge of facilitating the meeting, manager, mayor, mayor pro tem, et cetera, can be effective. So our practice now is to meet staff and the mayor pro tem Friday morning to have a pre-discussion of what Tuesday night will look like. How's that working?
I think it's working fine. It's also consistent with what our municipal code says. The only question is timing. I know only because I'm only went around long enough to know when it was different. It wasn't always on Friday morning, but it typically has to be no later than Friday noon because the agenda has to be put up by a certain time. And Friday morning just worked well for the last, I think it worked well for the prior mayor and it's worked well for me.
Now, you can have preliminary
It doesn't have to be on Friday morning, but
But you can have informal discussions ahead of time.
Sure.
So that the Friday morning meeting goes fast, because you've talked about it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, point by point, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah, you can, there's no prohibition on that.
and that wouldn't be anything formal, that would just be that you and Dave get on the same page earlier in the week.
And I think we'll talk about that when we get to.
Well, and to something that Bob said earlier, oftentimes those meetings aren't any big surprise, and they're not lengthy because they're items that have been talked about by the whole council for some period of time beforehand. So when they come up, it's not as though, oh my goodness, what's this? I mean, yes, there's some things that do come up because things come up, they're not on the long-range plan. But most of the items are coming directly off the long-range plan, so they're not surprises.
Well, just to share an alternate perspective, not really that much alternate perspective. Well, when I was on the District 9 board, Mark McDonald, the superintendent, would send me a draft agenda on Wednesday, saying, this is what I think are the topics we want to talk about.
He knows better than to do that.
And between Wednesday and Friday, we talk about it back and forth and take things off, put things on, and we can do it by phone. We almost never met personally to do that. You know, but there's a lot of back and forth about, you know, and he'd say, you know, I think we have too many topics to do tonight, so I think this and this and this we can kick to the following meeting.
We actually, I left that part out, that there's a very informal process among the Friday morning meeting participants where we do circulate an agenda in advance, and I'll get, you know, from Martin or David, hey, add this, take this off, we're on time, that kind of stuff.
But generally speaking, I think the process probably works just fine.
Right, and then the works well for me.
Yeah, if you guys want to work, well, and put it all
7
together.
o'clock.
7 o'clock on Friday morning.
Yeah, I'll make that concession, 7
We now know
o'clock.
it's at 7 o'clock.
Can we make it 6:30 on them?
No.
No, I'd be all for that. I would be all for it.
No, I have no problem how that process
You want to make that
works.
6:30 in the morning, and every Tuesday night we're going until 11:15.
All right.
The process very quickly expands out of that small group into a much larger group. The next step in the process is we publish all the agenda materials in support of Tuesday's meeting. The agenda itself, the staff report, the supporting documents, minutes from the last meeting, all those things. We do that by posting it on the web. We try to get it done by Friday at 5. And there's really two reasons why we do this, why it's a digital process. And the point here is there's no physical printed out packet. We do this to minimize the production and distribution time of getting the agenda out. And we do it for transparency's sake, because we are trying to demonstrate that the public has the exact same information as the council at the exact same time. That there's no separate packet, there's no difference in the material. If you see this on the web, which is open to everybody, the council sees exactly what the public sees, vice versa, at the same time. So with that, we'll open this question. What's working well? What should we take a look at? What changes should we consider?
Well, first of all, what's the deadline for putting out an agenda for a Tuesday meeting, technically speaking?
It is the Wednesday morning prior by 9 a.m.
I think he's asking open meetings.
Open meeting.
By the open meeting
Oh,
hours.
sorry.
48 hours.
48
7
hours.
p.m. on
48
Saturday.
business hours, or?
48 hours.
48 hours.
48 hours practice.
7 p.m. on Saturday.
Okay.
We shouldn't do that.
But what I'm concerned about is the 5 o'clock deadline. If he can get it out earlier, fine, but, 5 o'clock is pretty much the end of the day.
So get it out as early as possible, though?
Sure.
So you're saying earlier than 5 on Friday? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if possible.
Usually it's been 3:30. This week,
Yeah.
not so much. We had a couple glitches, but yeah, okay. Get it out earlier on Friday if possible.
Well, you're not, as a matter of normal procedure, choosing to hit send at 5. You're ending your morning meeting with the participants, and then as quickly as you can pull it together, you're distributing. I mean, isn't that
Correct, pretty much.
Sometimes it's 2:30, sometimes it's 5:01, but I mean, you're trying to crank it out. It just sort of depends on how the Monday morning or the Friday meeting goes.
Yes, and there's a whole staff process that drives it too, so the better we are at pre-planning and get our work together, the sooner it gets out. And we hardly ever scramble on Friday afternoons, of course.
You only spend the first 2 hours trying to figure out what happened in the morning. How to deal with all the crazy ideas that were thrown in.
Well, I think from my perspective, personally, just as a council member, trying to make sure I'm as informed as possible on the issues and on the items that are coming forward to the agenda. Obviously, you've been involved in the agenda preview as Mayor Pro Tem. I've been involved in some of those discussions and so I have some idea. But I do like to take a detailed look at the items, and to me, it's much easier for me to look at the items if I have them on hard copy than if I have them just looking at scrolling through PDFs online. This week I staffed a trial run, which was very, I think, informative of what did the packet actually look like when the entire thing, every item was printed out. And it was a huge stack. It was a huge stack of paper. So I think that's a little bit, on the inefficient side. I don't think we need that. But for somebody like me, having the agenda, the minutes of the previous meeting, and the staff action summaries as something in hard copy that I can write and make notes on. And then if I do need to go online, scroll, look at the contract in more detail, that's something that would be very helpful for me personally. I sit at the computer all day at work, sitting at the computer all day, or all evening on Friday evening or Saturday morning, looking at the agenda is not exactly how I want to do that and inform myself. So that would be helpful for me personally as one council member. I realize that there's a lot of difference in opinion.
No, I don't mind the paper either. I do like to have something in front of me to read. I don't need the detail that I had this week, but, just the minutes or, what we're discussing.
The staff summaries.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind that at all. But I don't need the 1,500 pages.
You don't need every document that's
No.
required in the state bid process?
No, that is a waste of paper. It's crazy.
Yeah, when I saw the stack myself, my first thought was, holy cow, what does that cost?
Right, so.
Yeah, and I sympathize, because I prefer to have something in front of me when I'm, researching for a case and whatnot. I like to have it in front of me, highlight, write all over it.
Exactly.
That said, I find that if I run into an item on the agenda that I'm that interested in having it, I just print it out on my own printer. So that way I'm, being as judicious as possible, and I'm not concerned about, how many village dollars have they spent on it.
Well, I think the moral of the story here is that whatever allows each member of the council to most effectively prepare for a meeting, different people like to get information different ways. We have a whole variety of ways in which we communicate, make information available to the public. What a surprise that people are going to have different things that they're more comfortable with.
Another consideration is, I know how our timing works, and being council members, we obviously have to work the weekend, or work like the devil on Monday morning, I guess. But I'm more concerned when we put the agenda together that we consider the public, because we shouldn't expect the public to work the weekend to look at the agenda. And so they aren't surprised on Monday or Tuesday. If you want to investigate something, if you're a member of the public and let's say you really want to dive into or investigate an item on the agenda for the Tuesday meeting, you have very limited time to do that. And I think there's ways to address it, but it's a consideration I have.
So you're not talking just about, particularly as early as possible on Friday, you might be talking about even earlier in the week in preparation for Tuesday.
Or maybe when putting the agenda together for Tuesday, maybe considering a public interest that might not go on this week's agenda, but on the following agenda, or publishing a warning of what's going to be on next week's agenda, so people have a heads up.
You know what, Bill? You reminded me of something. We used to have something like
Page,
that.
yeah.
There used to be a, on the horizon part, upcoming issues.
Upcoming,
And
yeah.
I remember, I know why it was taken off. That's another discussion.
Because we kept missing the date that we put out there, so.
Well, you don't have to put the date, but maybe just upcoming or something.
Yeah, it
that's,
could be during May and June or something.
Yeah.
But there was sort of,
yeah.
coming soon section on the agenda, but yeah, that was the problem, is that you also didn't want to create expectations you couldn't meet. So by saying coming soon, then it's like, well, where is it? And there might be legitimate reasons for it not to be coming soon.
Slightly different than on the horizon. This actually reminded me of something I'd forgotten about. On the school board, they use the board docs system, which is an online system, and the board secretary would put topics on the agenda and publish it once the topic was ready. So during the week, the agenda would be built. So certain agenda topics with all the supporting documents might go on Tuesday. Something else would go on Wednesday. And then at the deadline, they said the agenda's closed. So for example, if there's bid documents to pave a parking lot, and the staff member responsible for item 7A is finished on Monday afternoon, it goes up, with the understanding that that's not the full agenda, but then people can see earlier on, as soon as possible. Now, whether they want to do that or not, that may be a policy thing, but it just reminded me that that's what they did. That's what, I think it's what they still do. That as a given agenda item is fully staffed and briefed and staff signs off, and then of course the mayor would have to sign off, and then it goes up, that's an agenda item.
See, the concern that I would have doing something like that is then, public looks at that, oh, well, the item, they promised that was going to be on the agenda, and it's not up there, and, it does create some confusion. So, I think that I agree that posting it as early as possible is always desirable. But also recognize that there's times when items are, late breaking. I mean, you think about some of the items we've addressed even in the past few months where things have been changing up until even, probably minutes before the agenda is posted. So.
You were here on Friday afternoon, weren't you? That's the contrary argument, absolutely.
That's the problem with predictability. Things actually have to be as predicted.
Right. I like the coming soon idea, with a caution that,
We can come up with an appropriate disclaimer.
yes, in pedestrian terms.
No
promises.
No guarantee of future returns.
No guarantees, no promises.
Anything else, Mayor, on this one?
No, not for me.
Anybody?
Unless anybody else does.
Item C, the process continues on Monday morning. We actually have two processes now. The first is that the manager actually calls all the council members to do a couple things. One, to first and foremost understand the comments, concerns, questions of the council. Make sure as policymakers, the staff understands what more information do you need, what questions do you have on the agenda items, etc. That also offers staff the opportunity to provide additional information to each and every one of you, especially if we see a consistent thing that we may have missed that every council member or majority wants to have. It also allows the manager the opportunity to talk about anything and everything once a week with each council member. And that's important because we believe that it helps us establish a very strong, working, trusting relationship that's key to how we roll. So in these Monday morning phone calls, not only are we agenda focused, we're also just general topics, offers an opportunity to talk about anything and everything. In addition to this process, over the years, it's been on and off, the same concept of a Monday morning phone call from the Mayor Pro Tem. And this phone call, we just started doing this again in the last week or so. It's a slightly different purpose, and that is really understanding sort of things from the policy and what's important from how you might vote, those types of things. So if the manager's phone call is about facts, questions, and figures, the Mayor Pro Tem phone call is more about policies and policy questions that may be important among the council members. So I'm not as familiar with the Mayor Pro Tem, that phone call just started this week, but I am of course familiar with this Monday morning phone call. So maybe we could start with that. The manager Monday morning phone call, how is that working out for folks?
Only had one.
Only had one.
So far, so
I mean, you know, for me personally, I think it's something I need, you know, because I'm new at this. So I think, I mean, I don't know that it has to stay Monday morning. You know, I'm not stuck on Monday morning or anything like that. But I think it's working. I don't know. For me.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, just from coming on and extending now, I think it's very, very useful, especially, you know, new and to ask questions and to ask about precedents or ask about what's happened in the past, especially for the new council members. But I think it's a very valuable interaction and keeps the manager in tune with, you know, council members and the questions that they might be thinking about.
So is this in addition to your phone call? We would get a phone call from David? Is that what you're saying?
That's the idea.
On Monday
That's what we
morning?
started
That's the
this
idea.
week.
Yeah,
So
the idea.
yeah, that's working as well.
And
I've had it both ways, and I, you know, I appreciate the two different contacts. It essentially serves two different purposes. What I like to do when I get the agenda is, as I read through it, I jot down my questions, and I used to just email the questions to you, and then if anything came up, you can call me back. Now, I don't know if that's
It still worked for me when we did it before, so.
yeah, so, I mean, I'll go through the agenda and I'll jot down questions. I'll put them on a Word document and send them over. And then David can look at it, and if he needs to call me, you know, he can call me. You know, if there's something else that I should know, but other than that kind of works for me.
And there's two things going on here, and just from the perspective of someone who's been doing this since 2001, I hate to admit that. But I've seen it go a number of different ways. And there's the issue of interacting with staff to get answers to questions. So there's an issue on the agenda and you just have a question. Like Bob asked a couple today on an item, I just want to know X. And that more goes to how do we get answers to our questions. There have been sometimes titanic debates about whether council members should be calling up directors or even employees at different levels of the organization information. And I think generally speaking, the preference is that while you need to get the information you need in order to make a decision as a representative of the community, your first stop should always be with the village manager because we have to respect the reporting structure of the organization. And so the manager call is, I want to know X, Y, some factual information about an agenda item. And so I think that needs to continue, and that's really the purpose of that exercise. The other call comes right out of our municipal code. Section 2.17 of our municipal code talks about what the duties of the mayor pro tem are. And I remember this because I was the mayor pro tem under two different mayors and read it and followed what it said. And also going way back to when Tom Sissel was mayor pro tem, he would have these calls where it was literally not the factual stuff so much, but more the facilitating communication. What's going on prior to the meeting? Are there things that we need to be aware of? Like tonight, Greg wanted to take something off of the consent, and have it treated separately. Does Bill Waldak have an issue with this or that? And this is the predictability, no surprises. Not that anybody has to change their views or their position, their stance, but just so we all kind of know what's going on. In section 2.17 says a number of things about the mayor pro tem, but it says particularly under the powers of the mayor pro tem, that the mayor pro tem shall assist the mayor as requested in the performance of such duties and activities as the mayor may designate. This may include, but not necessarily limited to, the following: assisting the village manager in evaluating and preparing agendas for future council meetings. This may include meeting informally with the manager in addition to or in lieu of the mayor to discuss pending or likely agenda items as well as matters related to council functions. So that's why there's this Friday morning meeting in the first place. But then the next item, it's for those of you who are municipal code wonks, 2.17C3. The other role of the Mayor Pro Tem is to facilitate the exchange of communication and information between members of the council. The council members will, where practical, consult with the Mayor Pro Tem regarding the appropriate timing and efficient presentation of items desired by the council members before the village council. And then, of course, of such other duties as the mayor shall direct, and I'll have my list to you next week. But I read this because that's where this comes from. This isn't just some practice or policy. It's right in our municipal code. That's what the Mayor Pro Tem is supposed to do. And so I always view that second phone call, the Mayor Pro Tem phone call, as fulfilling the requirements of this section of our municipal code. And how you interpret those things, one could probably debate, but I've always viewed it as this predictability, the process, what's going on, where people's heads at. And of course, it all has to be done and consistent with the requirements of the Open Meetings Act, so it means a lot of phone calls. But I think it plays a valuable role.
I agree. One of the things that, I'm new to this role, and so one of the things I'd like to understand from council members is when is a good time for that phone call. And I'm not opposed to, say Sunday night, if that's a better time for a phone call, or, Sunday afternoon, if that's a better time for a phone call, or you're more available than, say, Monday morning or Monday afternoon, or, my preference at this point would be to take those calls, move those calls away from Tuesday. Because Tuesday, you're not going to know what there's not that much time to do it, but move it to Sunday or Monday, based on whatever is preference for each council member. Because I want to be available, and let's not play phone tag 5 times. Obviously things come up and not everybody's available exactly at the same time, but I do want to make sure that I'm doing that. So
When I talked with David yesterday, I mentioned that I've received calls from Commissioner Schnell, Commissioner Neustadt, now Commissioner Olson, and that point about the timing, I think, is important in that facilitation. There tends to be a little reaction to the recently, meaning Friday, introduced agenda. And so while those conversations, to the mayor's point, can certainly go anywhere in facilitating communication, focus on Tuesday night is probably going to be a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sooner rather than later is probably better. So whether it's a Sunday night or a Monday kind of a thing, I think makes a lot more sense than Tuesday afternoon at 2. The other thing that I would add as a possible change to this, and certainly whatever the group thinks makes sense, but I find in those calls a certain amount, and I'm talking really Mayor Pro Tem calls more than Dave's calls, but to some extent Dave's as well. They get to be a little bit, what's the right choice of words, perfunctory maybe. What I'm getting at is because there's a agenda on Friday night and there's a meeting coming up tomorrow afternoon, which is kind of the context that those are, that drives the focus of the calls. And you've got 6-7 calls to get in between 2 and 3 people. Wouldn't bother me a bit, and I think it might be helpful if there were Wednesday or Thursday calls, because you guys are gearing up for Friday prep to figure out what the agenda ought to look like. And yet we've just collectively discussed something, and people have said things that others have heard for the first time on Tuesday evening. And so pulling that all together might be helpful if there was additional calls. It certainly doesn't prevent any of us from calling each other, but.
There is a very informal thing that didn't even make the list, and
To your
that's.
point, it doesn't say on Monday.
Right.
There has been over the years since I've been manager, and Enzo can attest, there's sort of the Wednesday morning check-in by everybody, especially if we had a really important policy issue on Tuesday night, because we're all trying to understand what we heard, what the direction is, that kind of stuff. So there is an informal step here after the council meeting that's tended to happen over the years, and that's you check in with me, or you check in with Enzo, or you check in with each other. What did you hear? What did we learn?
Whether it's official or just an opportunity tonight to re-encourage it, I think that's an important part of our dialogue.
I think we had an example tonight of, when you're making all those phone calls, somewhere in the middle, a council member is going to go, I want to pull off this item, or maybe we should delay it, or something like that, whatever the conversation is, then you wind up having to start all over again. But some of those comments, I want to pull this off, I want to delay that, or I oppose this because, whatever's in that conversation, comes after you read the packet. So whenever you're done reading the packet and getting questions to the manager, then the phone calls have to follow that. So if it's going to be Monday morning, you won't necessarily, I don't know if everybody's going to be done reading it by Sunday night or the Wednesday before.
Well, I guess that could be, if I prefer Sunday night, I can tell you Sunday night. But are we talking about two different issues? I mean, Wednesday call would be what happened on Tuesday night, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the Sunday night, Monday morning call would be what's going to be on the agenda. Okay. And I suppose we can work that out with you as to.
Yeah, I think
do you
that's.
prefer, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, this is not a rigid, set in stone exercise. And I'm, of course, happy to follow up with council members after a council meeting. What I don't want to commit to necessarily is, every Wednesday, I'm going to call around and call everybody to talk about, what happened at the meeting. Because then, you're getting to the point where the time, the element. I think if there's some real specific or maybe particularly controversial or, issue, I'm happy to do that. But, for me, just as a sort of something that's set, I think it is important that we check in at least once a week, being those before a council meeting, so we have the opportunity to talk about the agenda, but also other issues that might come up. Happy to have additional conversations, but I think from a, sort of a planned, you should expect to hear from me, perspective, that's when the ones that I would suggest.
Keep in mind, you can still email and call up any other single council member.
Right.
About an item. So if you want to go through David, you can go through David. If you want to send an email to Bob, you can do that, or call him up, get Bob at work or Greg at work. I don't know, council members generally, I got to say, have always been pretty good. The ones that are working are very good with their mortgage-paying jobs. They're pretty available. So.
Well, since we're on the topic of talking about what happens at a meeting, for instance, we had a meeting tonight. Tomorrow morning, I call you and say, hey, what did you think about what, the presentation on the whole neighborhood? For me being new, how do I bring that up? Do I say, you know what, I really thought what she said was really important. How do we address this issue? Is that something on a Wednesday morning?
Please.
Say, hey, what she said was, important. So how do you address that? Me being new, is that new business? Is that, what do I say?
Well, I think there's a variety of ways. I think the most important thing is that connection to staff, that connection to your peers and the council, whatever works for you to share those ideas, to make sure we're communicating is the first step. And then I think we can plan out what's most effective, whether it's new business or just where we put it on the agenda. For example, we've had meetings where I thought, coming off of one Tuesday night, going into the next one, that an item was going to go right to consent agenda. But I got a call from somebody who said, you know, I've been thinking about what we heard last night. Why don't we put it on active agenda so we can discuss it a little further? Or why don't we put it back on first reading to have more conversation? And those are the kind of decisions that we'll make, starting on a Wednesday follow-up, and then on Friday morning with the mayor, mayor pro tem, that kind of thing.
And I encourage is if, you know, if there's a presentation or an issue or discussion that you didn't understand, had a question about, thought was important, that obviously staff is available as a resource for facts, and there's great deal of experience, but reaching out to, you know, your colleagues.
Well, yes,
that have been
obviously
on,
there's other of us
you know,
who
so
contact
I mean,
me.
the mayor's been around for
Decades.
quite some time. But, you know, myself as mayor pro tem, or Bob, or Greg.
Thank you for not making me the oldest member of the council.
Who have been around.
I don't mind my gray.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that, because I know that, you know, I never, you know, felt that there was anybody on the council before or now that I couldn't call up and say, you know, hey, what'd you mean by that? Or, you know, can we talk about this issue or that? And at some point, Dave's probably gonna block my phone number just so I can stop calling him so much. So, yeah, I encourage you, call Dave, call Enza, you know, they'll get you the information you're looking for and make sure you're moving in the right direction.
I would just encourage any form of communication at the staff level. We say it always makes us better, so. All right, Mayor, we'll take that cue. We'll move on to the next step, council questions and how we respond to them. After we get the list of questions that come up from the Monday morning phone calls and what we just talked about, we gather the questions, we put them in a document, we send them out to the village staff. They provide answers in a written format, and we post the written answers for all the public to see, hopefully by 5 p.m. on Tuesday. And again, we try to get a lot earlier than that if we can. The idea here is this enhances the exchange of information. It provides clarity. Questions get answered, but probably more importantly, the public gets to see the same sets of questions and the exact same sets of answers all at the same time, again, promoting transparency. How is that working out for folks?
Thumbs up.
I think that works well. I think it's a big improvement over years ago.
Okay, and I think we'll hear seeing a trend of trying to get things earlier to add to the clarity of the preparation time.
But not too early, so you don't miss a question and have to go add to it.
Okay.
The public's questions, I don't know, I tried to use that some time ago, and it is limited as to the number of characters. Is that working out, or has that been expanded, or should it be expanded?
Can we make a parking lot to come back to that one? Because I'd like to make sure we don't miss that one. We can get answers and help facilitate that conversation as well, Bill. How does the public use our online tools and other tools to get their questions put in the mix as well? We'll follow up.
Earmarks?
Yeah. I forget the number, 40 characters or less. Yeah, a little character. And you know me, I can't stick to that. But now I don't have to.
No, now you don't.
Okay, good.
Is that what you call it, a parking lot?
Yeah, we were park ideas to come back to them later.
Time to repay.
The actual council meeting itself, of course,
I learned
has
something tonight.
3 main components to it, and that is, on each time we meet, we have a consent agenda, an active agenda, and a first reading agenda. We all know how they're currently used. This practice came about not that long ago. We used to separate out by type of meeting. We used to have, this is a first reading type meeting, which we call the workshop, and then there was voting on a different night completely. We changed to this so that every time we meet as a team, it allows the council to do all of the types of work, voting, the more routine or less controversial items on consent, and the ability to workshop. All things at all meetings. It was an efficiency. It was designed to be more efficient and allow all types of work at all meetings. How's that working out? And Mark, you've seen all different ways.
Yes, I have. Just for context, once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away, we used to have 4 meetings a month. And 2 of those meetings were council meetings, and 2 of them were workshop meetings. And they were very different. So the workshop meeting would take place, and it was an informal discussion where the whole night was just talking about stuff. There were no votes on anything. And it really allowed just for discussion, because you weren't voting on anything, you were just talking about stuff, having a conversation. It was more informal. In the following week, you would vote on the things that had been discussed at the prior week's workshop if they were ripe for a vote. And then you'd repeat. And so it was workshop, voting, workshop, voting, workshop, voting, workshop, voting. It was streamlined, the thought being, well, do we have to have 4 meetings and keep doing that? Why can't we workshop something, vote on it the next week, and then workshop something for the next week, and do it the way Dave just described, and be a little bit more efficient, and the added benefit of having 3 meetings a month rather than 4, and there were a whole bunch of reasons for that. I'm fine, I think it works fine the way it is, but there are other ways to do it.
I like it the way it is.
I'm fine with the way we do it now. I mean, I think we go out of our way to explain when we're in the voting part of the meeting and then we're in the workshop part of the meeting.
And I think the fact that, you know, we try to be so transparent and get everything out to the public, you know, I don't think having a workshop and then a meeting is going to do anything differently.
I mean, I've just having seen it done both ways. I haven't seen any degradation in the ability to discuss something by going to the 3-meeting rotation than what was done before.
Well, keeping in mind that if something's really complex, we have a 4th meeting.
Well, right.
So,
Yeah, I don't think we've ever been shy about having a town hall on this or a workshop on
yeah,
that.
so I mean, that's,
I mean,
that concept is working fine, I think.
First reading if necessary.
Yeah.
We've done that too.
Correct. You just put it back on first reading, or we've even done what we're sitting in right now, where we'll like literally move something into the committee room for a deeper dive.
And I think to Bill's point, we can, if there's need, moving, you know, adding a 4th meeting is certainly not out of the question in a month.
Right, rather than having it a requisite 4th meeting.
Correct.
Yeah. You can always have one if you feel the need to, but you don't, it's not built into.
Well, you know, in a month with 5 Tuesdays, when there's going to be 2 off weeks, and then, you know, adding, if there's an issue that might require, you know, decision more quickly, I think we should, it's not happened since I've been up here, but I think we should feel very, I guess, the mayor calls a special council meeting. I think that would be something, you know, we should use if necessary.
I can't remember the last time that we've done that.
Yeah.
You know, when we first
There
went
there are rules that's in the, about calling a special meeting, but, no, I'm just talking in terms of, you know, financial, or long-range planning and,
Right.
you know, those type things, it's automatic, because you can't do that on this type of an agenda.
And when we first went to the all types of work, 3 meetings a month, we were using the 4th Tuesday more often. And then we got away from that due to vacation schedules and predictability and planning. So it's good to know that this council is open to taking a look at reusing the 4th Tuesday, again, putting that back in the mix for special deeper dives, more discussion. So we can take a look at that as we move forward as well.
One thought I want to offer, though, is that, actually, a question and a comment, like I'm calling a sports show. The question is, has staff seen any problem completing the work of the council with 3 meetings a month?
I'm going to ask the people who actually do a lot of that work. I'll put Mike, Enza, and Alice. Anybody wants to chime in on that? How's that working out?
I think it's actually allowing us to do more work because we're using the consent agenda in a different manner. So it's really speeding up the work.
Because going on that point, you know, there's a saying that work fills the time allotted to it. If we're finishing what we need to finish in 3 meetings, having a 4th meeting means we'll just spend more time and accomplish the same that we accomplished before.
Yeah.
So what's the point? And also, jumping ahead a little bit, I can see from staff's perspective, to prepare for a council meeting is a lot of work. And it pretty much consumes all of your bandwidth for that day or 2. So if you have 2 weeks to work, well, you don't have to see us. You get a whole lot more done. You know, and so that's kind of a blunt way to say it, but that's really, I can't imagine what it's like, and probably could, what it's like Monday and Tuesday preparing for a council meeting. That's a lot of work, which isn't really doing the work of the village. So if we're getting our work done in 3 meetings,
That was another reason really why we went to the 3, is to allow us some time to work on other.
You probably got a whole day back that you could actually implement policy rather than talk about it.
because you're the folks supposed to run the village, we're supposed to just oversee you. So as a consequence, we need to give you time to do your job.
Having experienced both formats, I would agree, it definitely creates a certain rhythm to how the month goes once we get to the end of the month, and we can get a little more focused on some of those longer-term projects and initiatives, because we can shift the focus away from council meeting planning preparation. So it's beneficial, and it allows us to do the work of, preparing for the effective council meeting.
Well, I don't hear anybody, thank you, I don't hear anybody arguing to go back to 4 meetings a month.
One thing I did want to point out, I think the 4 meetings, I think that's 3 meetings that are set aside, but I want to just point out the consent agenda. The council rules, Rule 5A states, the motion to adopt the consent agenda shall be non-debatable. So I think we should use, so if an item is on the consent, if there's any discussion, whether positive or negative, or commentary on the consent agenda, that item should be moved off the consent agenda. So
I
think
believe also, correct me if I'm wrong, that the right to remove something from the consent agenda is automatic.
Correct. Any council member.
No, we should not discuss the consent agenda ever. If it says someone should take it off in order to have a discussion.
Right.
See, I think the way we got off track was when you start publishing things on Friday night, end of business, and it shows up on Tuesday, and you have it on a consent agenda, then the public doesn't really get a chance to react. And so at the meetings, you're saying, okay, come on up and question us on the consent agenda, which is something we shouldn't really be doing, which is, what I always pushed for was like first reading, and then it goes either on active or consent agenda the following week. So the public has roughly a week and a half to look at any item, whether it winds up on consent or active agenda. I think they need the time. Now if it's something very routine,
the bills payable.
The bills payable, that kind of thing. Maybe that's something that can traditionally go on, but it scares me when you move things, when you publish it on Friday and then you finalize it on Tuesday, and you don't allow the public, that extra week to look at it.
I think there's a little bit of judgment call that goes into it. I think staff does a good job of, I don't need to refer to people in the third person, does a good job of sort of deciding what's going to be appropriate consent and what isn't. But then I think even in the Friday meetings, there's some of that too, where, I wouldn't put this on consent. This is something that, Jose is going to want to talk about. Let's move it.
Or this is something the public is interested in. We need to put this on first reading.
Yes.
This can't go right to
We
a consent
do
agenda.
try to do that as part of that agenda process. We can't always get it right, because you never know how someone's going to react to something all the time. But
I like the check and balance we have, because it's the manager's job to put the consent agenda together, and each individual council member has the right to pull anything at all off for any or no reason, and that seems to work pretty well. So if the decision that staff made is not aligned with even one council member, it gets corrected immediately.
And I think that the fact that it happens so infrequently is probably a good indication that it's working pretty well. I mean, there's going to be things going to get pulled off. There's going to be things that, Greg learned something that he didn't realize earlier. It's going to happen. It's no big deal, which is why we do it automatically. It used to be done by vote. It was much more dramatic. I want to remove this from the consent agenda.
Yeah, I remember doing it.
But how could you do that without deliberation?
Well, we deliberated. We deliberated.
Well, and the other thing I would just note, it sort of blurs into this next topic, which is the item F, is the public comment. And if you put the public comment right at the beginning of the meeting, public comment on items not appearing on the agenda or the consent agenda. So if the public
True.
wants to talk about the consent agenda,
Anybody can move it off.
there's opportunity for the public to comment on the consent agenda during the public comment.
Then you can move it on to active and
You
talk about
can
some more.
then a member of the council can move it off of active or off of the consent agenda and move it to active agenda and discuss it some more. I mean, if the public's saying
Or
this
stay
is
in the first
a
reading.
great idea, that we should definitely do this, you could leave it on. But if the public's saying, oh, I have concern or question about this, then you move it there.
True.
So I think that's a way to. Yeah, I think it's important then that the public comment would come before that, so the public has a chance.
So Martin, you call for public comment on, like I said, agenda, don't you?
I'm sorry?
You've called for public
Yes,
comment.
always.
So, and you always should, but I was thinking, you may want to clarify, well, I don't really want to.
But then it becomes debatable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a consent
It's not a
agenda.
consent agenda anymore.
Technically.
Just public comment, it's not a debate amongst ourselves. He's typically, he follows up with, does anybody on the council have a comment, which maybe shouldn't be strictly.
Right, I think, yeah, once in a while, folks comment.
You shouldn't ask for comments, but you can ask, does anybody want to remove anything from the consent agenda? That's not deliberation, that's an action.
Right. Does anyone want to remove anything?
See, my
And-
concern,
and I-
my concern
hold
was
on,
always
wait, I
that the
wanna get
public
through
gets
this
it
and
on
then-
Friday.
Thank you.
But the more opportunities for public comment.
Well, that's another good reason to have public comment of general nature in the beginning. I hadn't thought of that before.
Right. Right.
But at any rate, I think the moral of the story is that I think there's plenty of safety valves. If someone sees something in consent, they can get moved without question. And you don't need to justify it, you just say, I want this moved, it can be moved at any point in time and taken up at that juncture. Although as part of the conversations then, we usually want to know why, so everybody understands, but.
So everyone understands, and then for the mayor and mayor pro tem, they can use the discussion, the reasoning, thoughtfulness in setting a consent agenda in the future.
Yes, because I do try to do that. I do try to identify something, oh, this is something Gina's going to want to talk about, so let's put this on first reading and not on consent.
So that works for us. I'm just more concerned about the public having, basically, if they go out of town on the weekend, they see it. If they want to do any investigation or calling or anything like that, they have a very limited time to learn about the issue if it's something of interest to them. I always liked, first reading and then the following week, or, just having having the issue out there for the week and a half, where possible.
So you'd
But
suggest.
that's me.
So we got a couple of those.
Well, it goes back to what belongs on consent, and it really goes back to what you said earlier, is what's routine. Because I don't think we would want to first read everything. There's some things that would be, I think everyone would agree would be routine, then it really becomes a question of where you draw the line. And I think what I'm saying is we try to learn where that line is, both from the public's perspective and from the council's perspective. And it starts with staff, it starts with the council members, it ends with the public. And I think and just going back the last 4 years, it seems to be working pretty well. There have been that many instances where
Well,
somebody's been.
if something comes up, let's say you got a, $1.5 million project.
Yeah, well, I've even
and
got
you're
a phone-
putting it on the consent agenda, then you only got a short period of time. But if there was a way to take that $1.5 million project and not just slip it on the consent agenda, but park it somewhere so that it's going, that it's going to be on the active agenda or reading whatever the following week. So now the public has a week and a half to look at it or investigate it or whatever it is they want to do with it. But you don't have to have a presentation on each and every item.
Oh, I see what you're saying. All right, well, we can try to look at that as we start.
Something for food for
Start seeing
thought.
agendas.
Food for thought.
How far in advance do you know what's likely to be on a consent agenda? Because that could be something next week's consent agenda.
The coming soon thing, I guess.
It's interesting, the staff is constantly preparing agendas up to a month in advance. give or take. And each Wednesday, we check in as a leadership team, and where does this get slotted? And we're generally no more than a month out, so we have a really good idea of what's on the agenda. The decision of where it goes, first reading or consent, is made very late in the process. It's part of agenda management and where it gets slotted and whether we think it's routine or not, or how much the dollar amount is. So we know what's coming, but where it's slotted is the very last minute.
So maybe if you got that $1.5 million road project, you could put it on a, coming up, and if you already have the background information on it, you could, as Bill mentioned, you could probably publish that under a certain name, and then that would solve the.
Yeah.
Let me make this observation at this point. This is one of those issues, when, does something belong on a consent agenda? It's kind of like, is it a charge in basketball, or was it a block? Okay? Was it a strike or a ball? And frequently, there's no obvious answer. And the hypothetical or the theoretical reasons for consent versus active are endless, and there's pros and cons either way, and we'll never ever settle it. So the pragmatic approach would be to look at our history. And if an umpire is consistently getting something wrong, they're doing something wrong. So if we get a lot of feedback, you're putting stuff on the consent agenda you shouldn't, we should stop. But if we're not getting that feedback, all the hypothetical reasons why it's a bad idea don't really apply because people aren't concerned.
Nice way to sum it up.
Because the pros and cons, you could argue, you'll never reach an answer. Because there are irreconcilable policy issues both ways. So we look pragmatically at our experience.
So the moral of the story is, staff, council, and public all work together to try to deal with this on a case-by-case basis.
We'll take that as a cue to move on to council member reports. Each agenda includes an opportunity for council member reports. It's an opportunity for council members to inform the public of goings-on in the community and other items of interest, I think, is how the mayor says it.
Yes, and this is something that is kind of taken on a life of its own. Because I think Commissioner Olson is going to tell me about something in our code that says something other than what we do.
I'm trying to find
I'd love to hear that.
I'm trying to find it.
He doesn't have a life except to read the code.
I think there's actually rules about what we're supposed to be commenting on, but I don't think anybody's followed them for 15 years.
So I mean, there is the rule that says, member may not address council with regard to his or her or another person's candidacy for election to any public office, events, and then that's point one. They may not address council with regard to events sponsored by organizations other than the village or other local civic organizations. How do you define a local civic organization? And you may not address other matters not related to the business of the village, except as such matters may concern mayoral proclamations properly before the council.
What rule number is that, Dave?
That is 36, personal announcements.
I think we've never followed that
Perhaps
rule very
it's time to
closely.
amend the rule.
Well, I guess that's the question, right? Do we follow the rule or amend the rule?
I don't know what the rule would say, but I don't think we've, certainly not since 2001, that's never been followed.
I think you could probably do through a clarification of what a civic organization is.
I mean, I have no issue with somebody talking about an event, local event coming up in the community. I think that the idea of that rule is that people in the community should be able to speak to, people in the council should be able to speak to events in the community.
Right.
But, and I think that's fine. I think that should be at the end of the meeting.
Well, yeah.
Once we've addressed the business items.
Well, and that's the other question. There's two pieces to it. One is the scope and subject of the council member reports. And there's the rule, which has really never been followed very closely, and yet I don't think it's been abused either.
No.
I really don't think it's ever been abused where someone's talking about their business or they're talking about things that they shouldn't be talking about. It's always been some community-related topic.
Yeah.
What it hasn't been used for, we can come back to this, is that we all have liaison positions. And what it was supposed to be for, among other things, was for liaisons to report out to the rest of the council about things that they were liaising. So, for example.
Is it really a word?
That's a word.
It is now.
It is, yeah. Right. The roll.
Quick, put it in the
So
code.
why don't we just follow the rules?
Well,
What's wrong with that?
there's nothing wrong with that, although I don't think anybody would take issue with the fact that reporting out on things, I guess if it's something that's a village-sponsored event, the rule allows it. The question is, when you start talking about this 5K or this fundraiser or...
Is that a civic organization?
I
It's a
guess.
civic organization.
Sure. Well,
It's a civic
fine.
organization.
So
that's why I
promo-
suggested
Right,
clarifying.
it promotes
Civic
civics
organization.
in
Right.
the community.
I don't think it's ever been abused, so I don't have a problem with
The
it.
only thing I've ever heard anybody say that's not covered by that right there is occasionally you'll get a commissioner who wishes their spouse a happy anniversary or their grandfather a happy birthday.
Or head shopping Downers Grove.
Occasionally, something like that happens, it's certainly never been abused.
No, it's never been abused. I don't think that's a problem.
And-
I want to get back to the other point, which is liaisons. We have these liaison positions, and the original purpose of them was for, say, if Mr. White were the liaison to District 99, his responsibility would be to follow what's going on in 99, not necessarily attend every meeting, but if there was something that had some impact or of interest to the village, he would be aware of that, he would monitor it, and then he would report back to the rest of the council on it. For example, when I'm at the county stormwater meetings, I don't report on everything, but if something comes up that I think is relevant to the village, I'll report it out during the mayor's report. What I would like to see more of is to the extent people are going to serve those liaison roles, and again, it doesn't mean there has to be a report every week, but 'cause there's not going to be something to report on every week, but if there's something going on in the sanitary district, or District 58, or District 99, or the Park District, or whomever, that is actually of some importance or bearing upon village business, that would be the opportunity for the liaison to report on that thing. And there may not be anything for weeks, but then there might be something of significance. And it hasn't really been used for that very much. Periodically, sporadically at best. And I think all of us have been guilty, not except you, all of us have been guilty of that at one point in time.
Well, you've used that pretty well there, to that degree. I mean,
Well, the mayor's
Mayor
report, I mean, council.
It's like taking that point in the meeting as an opportunity to report out on things, organizations and groups outside the council that you're involved in, such as the NFC or the stormwater. You've used that pretty diligently. I think there's been generally a lack of use of that, maybe partly because council members haven't taken advantage of it, also partly because we distribute a lot of stuff. There's DMMC reports, there's minutes from other meetings, there's an enormous amount of stuff distributed. So what's missing is a council person's not taking the opportunity to inform the public a little bit more about it.
Yes, and focus the rest of us on it, because there's a lot of minutes, and a lot of stuff, and it can be mind-boggling, but if somebody's a liaison, and say, hey, I just want to make sure I highlight something for my colleagues and the public, yes, you're right, of something that has some relevance, some material relevance to the village. That's, so just from my perspective, that's what I would like to see more. Council reports.
More reports,
Well,
better discretion.
Yeah, and reports when they make sense. You don't have
Yeah.
to say, well, I was at the District 58 meeting, and, okay.
And nothing of relevance was discussed.
Donuts were great.
And then the other question is, where in the agenda does that report appear? For a long time, it was at the very end. We tried by moving it up. And I think there are arguments going both ways as to why it should be at the beginning and the end.
I mean, I'm of strong opinion. You should put, this is sort of the end of the meeting. This is the conclusion. This is reports about other things. We've made our decisions. We've heard the items on the agenda. We've heard from the public. And these are our final reports. To me, this is a good conclusion to the meeting.
Whatever everyone's thoughts.
Second.
Bless you. I've seen it both ways. I'm sick of this half dozen the other.
I agree. I'm fine with it either.
I like it at the end.
Yeah, I think the people's business should take place first.
Fine with me. Okay.
Okay.
What else was under that one?
That was it for
Councilmember
this side,
Forrest.
but this I think is an area that's had a lot of discussion and a lot of different approaches over the years and different interpretations. It's the concept of new business, and how do we come about putting it on an agenda, and what does that process look like? We have two things going on here. We have a current practice as outlined through an actual council policy. And the way that works is every single council member has the ability to direct the manager to place any item on the agenda as long as you get it to me by Wednesday at 9, preceding the upcoming Tuesday meeting. What goes along with that is two things. The first thing is that the question that gets put before the council is, should we look into this? It's not a debate on the issue. The question is, should you direct your staff and legal counsel to spend more time so that it can become an issue that is put on first reading? So anybody can ask, any item can be put on, but the question is, should we look at it? The other thing that goes with it is this concept that there's a limited staff preparation time. This is that we as staff prepare some level of background report. It is not specified as to how much staff time, it's not written in the policy, but we've generally said about 4 hours worth of staff time is the maximum we'll do, just to frame up the issue to ask that question. So that's what's actually written. There's a lot of reasons we do that. One is we want to encourage and embrace each council member's ability to help put any policy question they want on the agenda. It also is done to provide council members enough information to decide whether we should look at it more. And it also gives staff some guidelines as to how much time would we spend. So there's an efficiency aspect of it here. And it also allows us the opportunity to make sure that the majority of the council acting as a legislative body, is the one deciding whether we take this on or not. That's important. The other informal way we've been doing it on and off over the years is sort of what I call the heads-up approach, and we've seen a lot more of that as well. It basically, when the new business item comes up on the agenda, the mayor will ask, does any council member have any new business? And sometimes a council member will say one of two things. Yes, I have new business and I'm talking about it tonight. Here it is. Or I'm going to have new business. I'm giving the council and the public a heads up that I'm going to ask staff to prepare an item. So we've gone about this a variety of ways, and with that I'll turn it back to the mayor. What's worked well, what should we take a look at?
Yeah, well, I think that for the most part, this worked well, and again, it comes down to that concept of predictability that we're talking about and process. And I don't think the actual process is as important as having one, and everybody knows what it is, and we basically follow it. And this can come in a number of different ways. Someone could have a item of new business that is fairly well formulated already, because they just want to have a food truck ordinance in Downers Grove, and they just want to take the one from Portland and just cross out Portland and write in Downers Grove, and there's not.
For sure you were going to go with leaf pickup.
No, I'll throw myself under the bus.
Well, I believe pretty strongly it should be on the written agenda that's published Friday, that people shouldn't be able to bring up new items of new business verbally on Tuesday with no advance notice.
Well, they shouldn't be discussed. But hold on a second, hold that thought, because we can change the process. But I'm just thinking, what's been going on is, sometimes I think even discussions, well, okay, and it's a fair point. What has happened sometimes is even the discussion that night will lend somebody to think about an item of new business. And at the end of the night, they'll bring it up because of a discussion that happened earlier. So there isn't that well-formulated piece. I think ideally, now, although that would argue for you just have to wait a week. Just bring it up the following week, don't bring it up that night.
People make first impressions, and to make first impressions without there being advance notice of it can lead to unfair deliberation.
Oh, that's a fair point.
If we look at, if we take the guidance from the floor and look at our existing experience, it would suggest that the way it's been operating has caused little or no difficulties. Certainly nobody being sprung upon. New business is few and far between because of our LRP process, primarily, I think, because we have sort of this open vetting. And what's been going on is people saying, Mayor, to your point, something jumped into somebody's head, and what's been said is usually something along the lines as Dave described, hey, I want to give everybody a heads up, I intend to bring this. And that works it kind of works alongside the idea of us being prepared and informed. Because it gives everybody an opportunity to start the process and start to digest or something coming, as opposed to just showing up and springing it on everybody.
I think there's something important in what you both said. I think there's advantage to having things gestate a little bit before they show up, because there's going to be both pros and cons to bringing something up sort of sua sponte. Number one, it could be perceived as a surprise to the public and as a surprise to the other council members. But 9 times out of 10, if you're bringing up something sua sponte, you probably haven't given a whole lot of thought, and myself included. And maybe it should gestate a little bit more before it goes into this. So I'm open to the idea of saying that it actually has to be on the agenda, which all that would mean in that situation is that you just, meeting's over, call Dave and say, all right, put it on the agenda. And now it's on the agenda for the following week. Unless it's something of obviously some urgency, which I can envision that happening, but unlikely. Because the real purpose is give the public a heads up, give the rest of the council a heads up, give staff a heads up. And certainly as a courtesy, there's nothing wrong with saying, oh, by the way, and I greatly appreciate people who have done this, by the way, I'm planning on asking for a new business item, but it's not on the agenda, but it will show up on the agenda. That's just a courtesy to everybody, the public. But I'd be...
But if the deadline was earlier than Friday, people have advance notice anyways.
Well, right. But you could even say, tonight, for example, I'm going to ask for an item of new business next week. That's going to be X, Y, and Z.
Well,
You don't actually ask for it until...
There are pragmatic, we can't look at it pragmatically to see it's been abused, and
There's not going to be any discussion of it.
Well, that's
It's just a
but,
notice.
My understanding of the psychology of persuasion is that first impressions are sometimes hard to overcome. And if a first impression is made sua sponte on an issue that you thought about for 30 seconds, and someone says, well, what do you think about that? And it puts the pressure on you to have an opinion when you haven't even thought about the topic more than a minute or two. And
Well, but there's I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm saying is that I would think it would be wise, for the reason you just recited, for someone to not bring it up and instead make sure it's more formulated, put it on the agenda, and then shows up and then prepare to talk about it. But I don't know if that means you can't mention as a courtesy, oh, by the way, I'm asking staff to consider, to put on the agenda as a new business item next week, a food truck ordinance for Downers Grove. We don't have to talk about it.
That's certainly been recent practice.
Yeah.
It's been just
We
that.
don't have to talk about it. It's just, okay, I look forward to seeing it. But I agree with you. I think the wiser approach would be not to try to spill out the
See,
full-blown.
and also on the Open Meetings Act, I don't think we can give a head nod to staff to research something that hasn't been put on the agenda.
No, all you're saying is you're about to engage this process. That's really all you're saying. But I agree with you. I think it would probably be wiser to think about in advance.
Gina, you had a
I have
question.
okay, so when you're talking about new business, council member new business, right here, number 18?
Yes.
Is that what you're
Yes,
talking about?
that's what we're talking about.
Okay, so, for example, council member new business, so let's say I had something I wanted to bring up, but I would have already discussed it with Dave Fieldman. By the way, I want to talk about this. Is it going to be listed?
Yes.
Or is
Yes.
it just going to say council member new business?
No.
But you will all know what my new
No, it
business
will be
is.
listed.
I'll answer your question.
You know,
In
like
the-
I want a stop sign at blah, blah, blah.
Okay, if you had, let's say, a week ago, you had set the day by the prescribed time, I would
Right.
like to bring up as an item of new business on the May 12th, 2015 agenda, a stop sign at the corner of Smith and Jones.
Right. So that would have, actually,
There
those
would have
words
been a
would
bullet
appear
point.
on
There
here.
would have been a bullet point under
Gotcha.
new business that would have said, proposed stoplight at Smith and Jones.
And would it say my name or?
Yes.
What would it say? So it would
Yes.
say Gina
And
Fatimo.
there would be a sheet that looks like this, would say, subject, new business item, stop
Gotcha.
sign, Smith
Okay.
and Jones, and
Gotcha.
and then in the staff, it would have the paragraph that you would share with staff.
I
Yes.
like that.
And it would
say
simply be a
action in the
description
direction
of
council.
what it would be that staff would pursue should the rest of the council agree that it should be pursued. It wouldn't be a full-blown workup of the issue.
Right, I would
It
just
be
be
enough to have a
introducing
conversation.
it that
Yes.
evening.
Then the
because
practice has been that, when we ask for new business, I would specifically turn to you and say, well, we have an item of new business, and since Commissioner Vitimo asked for it to be on the agenda, you would have the privilege of then
Saying my new business.
explaining what it is.
Gotcha. But in the past, it's been anybody, when you say any new business, and you give everybody the opportunity to speak.
Well,
Is that what's
well, and I guess
happening?
what we're talking about here is going away from that, and I wouldn't be asking people that question. Either, there are only one or two things would happen. Either someone would say, I don't need new business tonight, Mayor, but next week, I'm going to be asking staff to put together a new business item that will be on the agenda regarding a stop sign at Smith and Jones.
And then
And
the
that would
only
be
further
it.
response from other council members is thank you for sharing.
Yes,
And
there'd be no discussion.
Right.
No discussion
Right.
because,
And if it
I have
is
no problem
on
with
the,
that.
and, right, I have no problem with that. If it is on the agenda, I think it needs to be very, this idea, nod, or, we're gonna nod, or this or that, is very unclear to the public, very non-transparent. The minutes are very unclear. It should be, if it's an item on the agenda, it's moved, it's seconded, it's moved by the.
Move it.
Move on.
Right, the person who presented the item.
so the policy, this is what we're talking about, is that any member of the council can ask staff within whatever the deadline is.
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock on Wednesday
9 o'clock
morning.
Wednesday morning.
I might move that back, move a little, I'm at 5 PM on Wednesday.
Whatever the deadline is. Any council member can ask staff to put a new business item on the agenda, and it will appear as an actual bullet point. Stop sign at Smith and Jones, Commissioner Vitimo.
Okay, so, and otherwise.
You don't have to say anything in advance to everybody, that next week I will be doing this. You could, you don't have to.
All right.
Because it'll just show up next week, and then everyone will see, oh, there's a new business item, Commissioner Vitimo, it's a stop sign at Smith and Jones. And then when we get to it, you can explain what it's about. There'll be a little piece from staff describing what it's about. No one will vote on it that night.
Right.
It'll
I
simply
get
be
that.
discussed as whether this is something that should then appear on a first reading later.
That's what we would vote on,
Yes.
Yes.
is whether to keep
Right.
it, yeah.
And this comes back
Whether
to
to
David's point
consider-
about whether there should be head nods on this, or we should actually vote
We should vote.
formally
Should vote.
about putting it on the agenda, which actually I think is clearer. Because really, when you're nodding your head or you're saying yes or you're voting, it's all the same thing.
So essentially, it has to get approved twice.
Well, the first one is just to make it a first reading item.
It isn't approved twice, because staff's only done very limited work on
It's
it.
really no different than what we've been doing historically, it's just been with head nods.
Staff won't have it fully prepared.
Right.
So
That's what we've
that's
been
if we
doing.
decide. I mean, are we gonna decide to say, anyone can bring up new business whenever they feel like it, or are we going to
Bless you.
have
Well, that's
new
probably,
business
that's probably not
presented?
legal.
I mean,
Well,
I don't
If it's
know.
presented an item, here, I have the item. I'm able to see okay, this is a brief description. The question is not, do I agree with this or not? The question is,
Do I want to hear more
should
about this?
staff pursue this? Should we direct our staff to pursue this item? Because so far, remember, the Biden new business, they've only gotten 4 hours, right? That's the maximum amount of time staff can work on it, and whatever research. So,
Right, in some respects, all the new business vote is that staff can now spend more than 4 hours
right.
investigating
Okay.
it. So a vote yes there is really, it's a maybe.
It's not really, it's not a policy decision.
No, it's not.
It's
All you're saying is, what the council is
Investment
authorizing
of
staff to
state
spend more
resources.
time digging into this for the benefit of the full council. And a vote yes to a new business item showing up on a first reading is only, it's basically, you're just voting maybe. Saying, I want to see more about this. I still may vote no, once I see all the details.
See,
I just
and-
don't have enough information.
And to use a concrete, pragmatic hypothetical, okay? I may, at the end of the day, decide that I don't think District 99 should have movable type signs. But I believe it's in the public interest to learn what new technology might be out there. So at the new business, I might say, yeah, I want staff to let us know what type of movable type technology exists that didn't exist 20 years ago. But
4 hours are up and they had to stop.
But they can spend more time on that to educate the public on, and us as to what technology is available. But I'm not committing that I'm going to vote for it. I'm just saying, I think the public would benefit, we'd benefit from knowing more about it.
Correct.
Right, whatever.
And that's controlling that's allocating staff time, not chasing our wild gooses around.
Yeah, and that's
Or
the
wild chickens.
biggest thing. That part of the reason for that sort of two-stage process is that there's 7 of us taking input from the public all week long, all year long. And so we could come up with 7,000 ideas over the course of a year. And you still only got X number of staff hours.
And it happens. Because otherwise, they're getting calls from all 7 of us. I got 3 things, Bob's got 9, you got 12, and they're running around with all these things. And how do we know that any of them are going to even reach that materiality threshold? of, oh, this is something the council wants to pursue, even if it ultimately gets defeated.
I didn't say this earlier, I want to add this right now. I feel pretty strongly that no member of this council should be getting information from staff except through Dave. Now, if he wants to include Enzo and Mike in his inner circle and gives us permission, that's fine. But as a general rule, we should not be going to department heads, we should not be going down the chain.
What am I going to do with all my comments?
Well, you can, because you're the mayor, okay, but generally speaking, we shouldn't. Because, and that's out of respect for his position.
Well, that's pretty consistent with how things happen.
That's pretty much the way.
Exactly the way we do it.
Okay, good.
It goes back to that Monday morning meeting
Yeah.
too, that the distribution of whatever information is out there, we want to make sure is council-wide.
Bill, we had some issues with some council members a million years ago with that, and I hadn't seen that as an
Okay.
issue in
Fine.
Yeah.
a long time.
All right.
I think,
So just
Going back to the flow of the meeting, though, you have public comment, and I've seen it many times over the years, where some issue or something is raised up as part of public comment. And the way we're progressing through this process is the only one who's allowed to talk about it is the mayor. And if somebody has a question for the person or a comment for the person who's making the comment, more information, whatever, you can't do that. So everything goes through the mayor. So now you went through an entire meeting, and maybe it's a situation where everybody, or most, want more information on a topic. Maybe it's a semi-emergency, or, you know, my house floods, can somebody take a look at them? There are just things that crop up that maybe belong, that should be brought up that night for new business, or new discussion, or something. And not wait another week to decide whether you're gonna, I don't know how exactly to, but as a council member, you really can't comment on anything, so somebody can come up with something that's you know, it's like a lightning bolt idea or something, and you don't even get to bring it up during the meeting.
well, you can say that you're.
Well, at what point? It's not new business.
Right, but you can say that this is something you intend to bring up.
I think it's a lightning bolt point. I'm going to ask for this to be an item of new business next week.
I was really impressed with what Mrs. Jones said, and I think that's an important topic for us to address, and I'll be writing up a new business item on it.
I'm going to get some more information from
You
staff.
call Dave and tell him everything you're thinking.
When I hear that on a Tuesday night, I take that as you meeting the Wednesday 9 AM deadline. You happen to say it publicly, but I was directed at the meeting, so that's how I've taken that in the past.
And I'd move that 9 AM deadline back.
I agree with that.
5 PM on even like noon on Thursday, I'm fine with it.
Is that,
It's
is that,
Amendment to a village
That
council
required amendment to policy, so.
yes.
Yeah.
I'm happy to write that new business item for next month.
It is before 9 AM tomorrow, so.
Before that,
Dave,
got it.
I will be,
Got it.
I'm going to share that change to policy.
The other thing, just with respect to the process here, is that, you know, part of the 4-hour rule, whether it's 2 hours, 3 hours, or 4 hours, is not designed to, you know, only invoke that when there's new business. Sometimes you don't even know if you want to have any new business, you just want to get some information about something to find out whether it's even a new business item. So for example, you may want to say, hey, you know, did we ever look at leaf pickup? I think that would be a great idea.
Or curb the government in Florence.
And then you could ask staff, you know, what's the deal on well, how come we don't do leaf pickup like such and such a time? Did we ever look at that? It turns out that there's boatloads of information about discussions on that. And you may read all that prior information, just like, oh, never mind, or, you know, but that's the other reason for the information, is because we don't want to be bringing things up uninformed, back to Bill White's point.
That's the most important thing, and I really feel very strongly that directing staff, that the transparency, requiring, having the item on the agenda so that people know what is, they know what's being discussed, and then having a vote, they know that there's been direction. It's not, you know, that's very, very important to me. So
Clear direction, outcome, understood by all.
no, clear direction, that we understand, here's what it is, because if I say, well, I think what Mrs. Jones, my new business items, I think what Mrs. Jones said was really good, and I think we should investigate it. And Gina hears, well, she heard Mrs. Jones to say that it's really important that stormwater be addressed on, you know, on that street. And I heard, well, I think, you know, it's really important that the condition of the street be. We have two totally different ideas of what that item is. If it's in writing, if it's on the agenda, then we as a council understand what the item is. What- So that is very, very important to me, having that definition.
That's pretty much what we've done. The only difference is rather than moving it, Dave's solicited head nods. But there's been precious few times where somebody actually introduced expecting debate and resolution, a new business item at the end of the meeting. Once, twice, maybe, never. What's generally gone on is, to Bill's point, an example here, something's heard, somebody says, yeah, you know what, that really resonated with me, I want to bring it up next week, and then there is that prep.
Yeah. Just from a staff, question to staff.
Well, it gives these guys an opportunity to react to what they may have just seen.
Yeah, what Bill White was talking about.
Spontaneously
Same thing happens
combust on
to
the
staff,
top.
because we can't process it that
Well,
fast either.
Right. If somebody says, well, I think it's really important that we have, you know, that the village do X, and I say, wow, that's a great, you know, my initial impression is, wow, that's a great idea. I'm gonna bring up is that I'm a new business, but then I talk to staff on Wednesday morning and realize, oh, that's gonna be $5 million.
What was I thinking?
You know, that's just crazy.
One comment I want to offer now, though, is that on this item H, it appears that we have a policy in place.
Yes.
And as I said earlier, I mean, there's pros and cons. There's no one right way to do it.
True.
So, I don't know, I guess what I'm saying is, I feel we've pretty much, you know, we have a good handle on the pros and cons, and we will debate this again, because we either live with the written policy we have, which means 9 AM Wednesday morning, or we modify the policy, and I think David Olson said that he's already given notice, which verbal is enough, I guess, that he'll be writing up a new policy. So we can talk about this in the context of specific language, too.
Certified mail return receipt.
Now, my question.
No, I want a thumbprint and an eye scan.
So my question to staff is, this Wednesday 9 AM deadline, right? You know, obviously, that's, you thought of the new business item, so you have to go run home, write it up, and send it over so that you get it in before the 9 AM deadline. Well, that's, you know, kind of a silly thing. I think you've heard some discussion here.
Our staff meeting is at 9 AM on Wednesday, so that's where that came from. We'd like to have that so we can discuss it as a staff instruction.
Because
That's where, I mean, we didn't just pick a.
No. Well, that's why I wanted to ask the
The
question.
primary deliverable of the leadership staff meeting on Wednesday morning at 9 is what's on Tuesday's agenda. So that's, if we come in there and we leave and we say, okay, this is the agenda, and Allison starts doing her work, and then I get the call, and then I go back in and we start the whole process over. That's where that came from.
Well, a solution to that, then, is that if you don't have it by 9 AM on Wednesday, you don't get any staff time until after the next meeting.
Yeah, and really what it comes down to is we only use a hard and fast rule if we can't physically get it done. That's really how we interpret that. If we can get it done, we'll get it done.
I can't realistically ask you to devote time to something I haven't given you enough notice. So if I don't get it by 9 AM, then I present this new business with minimal staff time, or you know, maybe 15 minutes.
So if I said to you, as I did today, I'm going to raise in a new business, I think there's a possible amendment to the new business policy, said that tonight. Okay. But I didn't get you a written document until Wednesday at 5. Is that enough time for then staff to turn around and put it on the agenda for the following
Yeah,
week?
usually it is. And what we try to cultivate is just such a strong working relationship among individuals and as a team that we just work through a solution, and it becomes much less formal. It's, hey, Dave, I got an idea, can you get it on? Let me check with our staff, yeah, we got it. So
Okay.
we've turned it around.
Just
in
the
a couple
verbal
hours.
notice is sufficient, because, I
So,
mean,
so
we'll-
staff needs to be notified. Now, what does the
It's
policy,
on the
I don't have the policy in front of me. You know,
Verbal or email?
I think it says verbal is fine. I think
It just
I'll-
says they
I'm-
must notify staff by 9
I'm
AM.
gonna look at, I'm gonna look at it, because the other item is, the other challenge is, okay, well, what if I said, I want this on, I told you tonight, I want to send you, and then I send it to you on Monday morning. Well,
Yeah, that's like a-
that's not gonna work.
Well, what
That's
we-
open meetings.
What we do to clarify this is if a council member gives us an idea verbally, and staff writes the green sheet, well, we do this with anything, we circulate the green sheet back to the new business introducer to make sure we captured it. And I remember Commissioner Waldeck and I was not on the same page with Bill on a new business item. I sent him the draft green sheet on Friday morning. He went, nope. And so then we worked together and fixed the green sheet to get his idea properly conveyed. So there's a lot more give and take. There's a lot more
So to
fluid.
me, there's a notice requirement, but there's also, you need to have your item in writing finalized by Friday morning for it to be on the agenda. Because if
That's
it's
the way
not.
it works, yeah.
Well, it has
Practically,
to
yeah.
make the agenda. You guys are gonna set
Right.
the agenda Friday whether you have it or not.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say it's gotta be there Friday morning, but if it's not, the agenda's still gonna get set by you and Martin and Dave and Mike. It doesn't mean I don't know that there's a value.
I guess technically you could put it on the agenda under new business saying, Waldeck's gonna talk about ducks or something.
Geese.
Whatever.
Wants to raise geese.
No, let's not get into raising. But anyway.
There you go.
Anyway, the point is I could raise it, you could decide to put it on the agenda, and maybe something happens over the weekend or on Monday, where, you actually look at the sheet and you go, this isn't gonna really work. You can ask to pull it off at the meeting, just say, do you have new business? I used to, but, I decided to pull it this week.
I want to make a comment about the allocation of staff time on this too, and I think this is also an example of looking at what the underlying interests are. The 9 a.m. rule for Wednesday morning, I think should be complied with if the council member is expecting a certain minimum level of staff contribution. If you don't make the 9 a.m. meeting, and staff doesn't want to put any time into it, then as long as they get to you by Friday morning, it can go on the agenda. But you'll say, we haven't had any time to do this. But also remember that if somebody comes to you with a really great idea and we don't have time to write it up right, and you want to put more time in it in your independent discretion, that's, I mean, where we aren't telling, you hear an idea from one of us, you think, that's a great idea, I want to look into that. Then obviously you have, you're making the call to do it, that's your call. We aren't directing you to do it, we just raised something that you thought was worth looking into. So obviously, like I said, David's going to write up a proposed new policy. At this point, my preference would be that if it's turned in, and by whatever process y'all think is sufficient, by Wednesday morning, then staff will staff up to X hours prior to the next meeting. If it's in by Friday morning, it goes on the agenda and staff will do what it can. And if other business keeps them from doing it, then they say, we didn't get enough notice to staff it. But it is out of a new business, do we want to talk about this more? And now we of course, this is the like pre-discussion, so we can debate this more, but as of right now, that's what I mean.
I think that it has to come, even if there's no staff time required, I think it has to come earlier than Friday morning, because
Okay.
at least there has to be the ability to put together a green sheet.
Thursday morning then.
I mean, to me, I think that's Thursday.
That's the point of the Wednesday, and
Right.
that's also functionally what's been going on when a council member on a Tuesday night says, I plan to.
Mhm.
That essentially functions as a notice.
Right.
And
That's
what's really been happening.
That's the notice, and then the actual written up item really has to be there on Thursday.
The times we've actually written even a small amount has been a more effective discussion because we get clarity of issue, that's all. So I think that works quite well.
I'm good with that.
All right.
With that change, that's fine. Yeah.
All right, we've got two more.
What came out of that was different than what we're doing now? Somebody help me.
It goes on the agenda in writing.
Two things. I think that, three things actually.
And it's what, I want to make sure that I'm not operating in a way contrary to what we kind of all head nodded tonight. Because it sounded very much the same, but for the fact that when it's on the agenda, instead of nodding, we're going to actually cast votes, which is fine. But procedurally, for the council person with the new business, notice write-ups, expectations about agenda appearance, none of that sounded any different than what we're doing right now.
I think the only difference from the staff perspective is I think over the last 6 years, 7 years, rarely we have had where somebody brings up an issue from the council seat, looks around and says, yeah, I have 4 people who want to do it, and we skipped a step. That's very rare, but it's only happened like 2 or 3 times. But I think that's really the functional difference I heard is that we won't use that process anymore. Unless there's like some kind of compelling timeline or emergency that Commissioner Walden was talking about.
Yeah, the only times that's come up have been, sort of radical situations like the 942 situation. I think something along those lines came up, but we were.
We need to impose a
Yeah,
moratorium
there
or
was
something.
it was a pretty radical environment. It wasn't sort of the general day in and day out council person has an idea.
It's very rare in the last 6 years, extremely.
But the manager and the mayor control the agenda. So if I call the mayor and say, I really think we should talk about this, he agrees with me, he goes on the agenda.
Well, right, did you realize that none of these rules apply to me?
Well, no, you set the agenda.
Yeah,
That's the power of the mayor, right?
Yeah.
And that's the other item is if, the formal.
So what do you want my
be
new
very
business?
clear. The head nod, that there's going to be a motion and a vote, and a second and a vote.
Well, I think that's just, it's clear. It may be formal, but it's clear, it goes back to.
Are we good with 4 hours?
Staff likes 4 hours because if you get 4 people in a room to make sure we understand what the issue is for 1 hour, that's 4 hours of staff time. And we work in teams, and it's a good rule of thumb. Anything less than that, if we were to be a strict adherence to it, we really can't even meet for half an hour with 3 people to understand it. It would just be like eating up all the time. So I think 4 hours is a real good rule of thumb.
And then I would continue to encourage people to use the 4 hours before bringing up the new business item. Don't bring it up and then ask for the time, although that's going to happen occasionally. But anything that is mindfully thought out in advance, I would get the information first. It's probably been raised before, probably.
And again, we don't need to fully settle everything this evening.
No.
And to that end, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, there's 2 more things, and thank you for talking me out of the longer list. Because there are more things, but this is going to be plenty to get to tonight. But let's just go to coffee to council, maybe we can bang that out real quickly.
Yes, go ahead.
And then come back to standing committees. Go ahead.
Coffee with the council is a meeting that happens, right now it happens once a month on the 3rd Saturday of the month, starting in May through September, and we host it at the Main Street train station. And
During the farmer's market.
And to coincide with the market. It has no formal agenda, and the expectation is that only one or up to all the council members are there, and at least one management level, leadership level staff person is there. In addition to that, we have one October coffee with the council, which is really a budget meeting. It's in our budget process, and it is an unscripted, no agenda budget discussion that is really led by whatever the public wants to talk about. These are intended to be informal interactions where we're sort of capturing, I was passing by and look, here's my council, I can talk to them. That's why we do it at the market. It is intended to be a resident established agenda, so the residents are not confined to anything the staff or the council came up with. They can say whatever's on their mind. We've taken the winter off. That practice came about a couple years ago because attendance was basically low. We used to have it at other locations, and they were generally not well attended. Also, sometimes we would get into some other facility, and just the nature of the facility felt like it should be a very formal meeting, and people started looking around for where's the agenda and where do I sit, and then it didn't really line up well with the intended outcome. This is another one that has changed many, many different times, many ways over the last 10 years that I've been here. So we're looking for direction because Saturday is a coffee with the council at 9 a.m. Train station.
One of the problems in having it at the train station, or at the market, people are walking by, and council members tend to mosey around. So now you got a resident that shows up and says, I got a problem, I got such and such a problem, and he tells one council member, The other council members are over there, and they're politicking over here, and there's just, and so now this person has to seek out each council member if he wants it known. I mean, it's just, it's way too informal. And people are talking problems, to somebody else. I may never hear about it, and there's no record of it.
I think Bill, you make a good point, and it goes back to what is the purpose of Coffee with the Council? Is it a meet and greet, or is it an opportunity for residents in an informal setting to come down and just address the council about whatever? Because you're right, there's two things that happen. And while the farmer's market is terrific, because there's a lot of people already there, people are coming to the event, so it's just well attended, you get two kinds of attendees. You get those that have been waiting all month to come to Coffee with the Council because they have some issue of great importance to them that they want to communicate to the council. And if they get there and there's 6 of us and we're all spread out and we're having side conversations and they can't address the council, they get frustrated. And maybe Mike's over here and Dave's over there, and getting the actual audience that person came down to get is unsuccessful, and it can lead to some frustration. On the other hand, one of the benefits of being at the market are that people had no intention of coming down and talking to the council. They come by and they say, "Oh, hey, it's Bill White. Hey, Bill, how are you?" They come up and, "Gee, I'm glad you're down here. You know what, I mean to ask you." And I hate to lose that spontaneity, but we've always struggled with how to balance those two things, because you're right, when everybody's just going to stand around and somebody just grabs Bob and they grab David and then they grab Gina, now there's 3 conversations going on. None of the rest of us know what's happening or being said. So I'm not getting the benefit of the issue that's been raised with you, or it's been raised with you, and I don't know what's going on. And it's partly your responsibility, but it shouldn't always be your responsibility to who raised what, about who, where, why. And yet I also don't want to lose that sort of neighborly, casual walking by with the stroller and, "Oh, hey, it's Bill Waldeck, how you doing?"
Is there a designated area? where
Well, yeah, there's a
people
designated
stand?
area, but
I mean,
when you're not in a room, when you're standing at the farmer's market, someone could be standing at the door, someone's standing at this door, or in this corner.
well, the train, I mean, that's like a big space.
Somebody could ask a question of one council member, that council member gives
That's what I was
his
getting
or her
at. I mean, is
opinion
there,
that may not agree with everybody.
Well, I think on some level, it's incumbent on each one of us who has one of those conversations that maybe other people haven't found their way into, to talk to Dave or Mike or whoever's there and say, I spoke to person X and they talked about Y, Z, A, and B, and these are things to follow up on. And at that point, it can go from staff back out to all of us to make sure that we all know, this particular policy issue, because it could be something as big as, "Why haven't you resurfaced my road?" or something to that effect, or it could be as small as, "Gee, my neighbor's got dogs that bark all night and I'm tired of it."
That's not small.
So, well, but I guess the point I'm trying to get to is it might be something that staff can solve very quickly, or it might be something that's a larger policy issue for all of us.
Well, here's the thing. And remember, back when we had the Heritage Festival, there used to be a designated space that was a tent that was designed for information. It was a meet and greet. It was there for that reason. We don't have that anymore. But should we try to turn Coffee in the Council to something like that? Do we want to do a hybrid where maybe we have it all year round, but those indoor ones are more formal by design? Like, when we're going to come in, and we're all going to be seated, and we're going to have people come in, they're going to raise their issue, and we're going to talk about them so that all of us can hear it with the benefit of staff. I don't know. The problem is, usually the people that make the trip down to the designated Coffee with the Council usually come with a purpose in mind. They're coming down because they have a question, a comment, criticism, once in a blue moon, a compliment, and they want to be heard. And you're right, I've seen that frustration. Someone will come down and, "Hey, wait a minute, Jose's over there talking to that person that's listening to me, and I want to get your attention." Or, yes, it's just not, I don't think it's a
Or you
good
get bits and pieces of a
get bits and
conversation that you
pieces.
don't agree with what's being told to that resident by that
Well,
particular individual.
that goes back to the issue of what is the council answer to the question, as opposed to the individual answers to the question. And in a more
the
formal
one-on-one
environment, it
you
tends to
can't
be
avoid
council,
that.
and a less formal environment tends to be the individual, where somebody grabs Gina and says, yeah, man, that Tully guy, I can't wait till 2019 and get rid of him. And, it's not,
And how is it different from public comments? Like, so you're saying people who don't want to come to the village meeting at 7 PM on Tuesday, so they're going to go to the Saturday thing?
right, well, it's on Saturday, number one.
Well,
That's
I know.
easier. Number
So it's a
two,
different day.
We're all
I get
standing
it.
around, and we're not in suits and ties. Well, most of us aren't in suits and ties.
No, I mean, I
And we're not on a
understand
dais, we're not on
Saturday morning.
TV, so it's much more
Right.
informal, so some people are more comfortable doing that for a
And
number
not a
of reasons.
public record.
That's right, that's another.
All right. Well, why don't we just keep it then? I mean, what's?
Well, I think we should do it year-round. That is number
just going in
one,
that
number
direction.
one.
The
important.
three things, I mean, I don't know how to solve
Suggested.
this last one, but the first two I was gonna say, I'm gonna go back to all year round.
Yes.
Yeah.
And where would it be all year round?
I'm trying to solve for
Can't be
the,
outside.
I'm trying to solve for the
Move
fact
around, go to
that,
Caputo's.
that people are coming down and they want to address the council. And the farmer's market, oftentimes it's not possible to do, just because we're all cats running around. Because, your neighbor grabs you, my neighbor grabs me, and all of a sudden you and I are in a different conversation. And then third person comes by, you and I are talking, so they approach third person, and now the person that came down to say something to the council is now just talking to Waldeck,
Part of,
which we know is.
Do we start a queue then, and we
Yeah,
say, okay, resident, you can't talk until this resident's done?
part of
Well,
what
we've tried to do that, but it's really hard, because if I get grabbed by somebody, now I'm trying to monitor the meeting, and it's.
Right,
it's-
well, and I
seems
think the
like our-
informality is what people like, sorry.
Go ahead. You're done.
No, go ahead.
Well, and I don't know if this,
It seems
go
like we
ahead.
should be seeking opportunities to have a variety of situations. If you were to queue up, for instance, if you were to have us all sitting at a U-shaped table, so we were all there and queue up people, I assure you, at least in my 6 years of being at this thing, that some of the people who come to the farmer's market will skip that.
Mhm.
That one of the reasons they go to this is because it's a different setting than coming to the microphone on Tuesday night.
Yes.
And so, if there's something else that ought to be added, perhaps, if there's a piece of outreach that we're not doing, I'd certainly be more than happy to add it. But I think the value to the community is in having multiple formats, multiple locations, and multiple times of opportunities to engage us, so that they can find it sort of in their comfort zone. Some people don't want to be on TV with a microphone.
I agree with you, and I think you put your finger on the divergence or the contrast that exists, is you'll get both sets of people come down. You get those people like, yeah, I want you all lined up because I have something to say to the council. And they get mad, and don't come back next month, because they feel like, I came down and I got to talk to Olson. I like Olson, but I wanted to talk to everybody. Where else was everybody else? Or whoever was there.
Well, I mean, that's hard to answer.
But then you get the people who do exactly what you say. I don't want to have that queued up thing. I just want to
Yeah.
come by and grab Jose because he's the only one that listens to me.
Right.
The truth of this is that it seldom is 7 council people. That's one thing. And it's usually a different set of folks that come by. There are certainly one-offs who take advantage of that one opportunity. But there's also folks who this is their preferred method, and so they come routinely. I wouldn't want to sort of deprive them of that preferred method.
I don't want to. This is why there's a tension here. If I had an answer, I would give it. But the other thing is, this is coffee with the council. Whether it's one of us or there's 7 of
Right.
us, people are expecting the council position, the council answers. If this is meet and greet, hey, we're going to be at the chamber event, you want to come by and say hi, okay, fine, that's not a council position. All I'm trying to say is if someone comes down and they're expecting to address the council, whether it's me, or it's you, or it's all of us, they're expecting the council, all 7 of us are represented, whether there's one of us there or 7. Is that structure, that meeting, that's the council. It's coffee with the council, it's not coffee with Martin.
Right, but you don't know if there's going to be 2 people there, 3 people, all 7
Well,
of us. I mean,
no,
I think it's a
you
good
don't.
thing, I think it should stay, but, the other part of it is, let's say I go, and I'm the only one that shows up that Saturday, and someone asks me about
How did you know?
whatever. I mean, but
That's
the
what we're doing
most
on
I
Saturday.
can do is take their name and address and their phone number and say, I will look into this issue for you. I can't say that I'm going to have an answer, so I
And
know
staff
people are
is
going to.
there.
Well,
Staff.
and staff is there, so I suppose, I'd say like, well, hi, nice to meet you. Here's Dave Fieldman. I mean, well, really,
you know,
That's
being
frequently what
honest.
happens.
I
You know,
think I plan on doing that no matter what the question is.
Well, okay, so.
That's why I bring mine,
I mean,
so.
I think this is a good thing. You're right, there are no microphones. It's a different venue for people to come out and say, you know, my dog barks all, you know, the dog barks all night. What are you gonna do? Can I shoot my neighbor and, you know, still live in Downers Grove?
And Waldeck
I don't
can say
know.
yes, and I'll say no.
sure.
Just give me a list of the next.
Anyway, I don't know how to solve it, because
Yeah.
we've tried it both ways, and we end up, somebody doesn't like
Well,
it,
you
no matter
can't
what we do.
solve it, because there's tension between
I'm
conflicting
trying to be
interests.
candid.
Well, to the end solution, I think you challenged staff to come up with some ideas of how you get to the end. We'll come up with some ideas.
All right, so.
But I think we have coffee with the council on
Yeah, I
Saturday.
just keep it.
We do have it on Saturday, yeah.
Yeah, keep it on Saturday, we should do it once a month. We should do some other locations, because we haven't done that for a while. Yes,
Right.
attendance is notoriously low, but I will tell this story as long as I breathe. Is the person that came up to me once and said, oh, you know, that coffee with the council thing, I really like that. I said, oh, Glenn, I'm glad you enjoy it. Yeah, it's terrific. I think it's fantastic. I tell my friends in other towns that we have this coffee with the council. I can go down and talk to the mayor and the council anytime I want. I said, oh, great, well, how many times do you come? I've never gone.
But he was
So,
there.
well, why are you such a fan? He says, because I know I can.
Yeah, right.
It's not that, there's
Right,
nobody that
so
fact
it's a
people
good
know they
thing, it's
can, has huge value in this community.
Is there, zooming down to 500 feet on this, okay? I think in the fall and winter, when the weather is not good, think about making an arrangement. It could cost a small amount of money, or maybe not with the business, but cordoning off part of Christina's Restaurant or Pete's Coffee might be a good place, because that way you could put a sign in the window telling passerbys they're there. People are going through there anyways. Like, I'm thinking, it's kind of small, but that far east room at Pete's might work.
Well, we're gonna hold the next 6 in the police station.
Okay.
But like,
There's no room.
All right,
No, I
but
think,
year-round.
yeah, I think year-round, and I think you'd also go where the people are. You know, there's gonna be a ton of people at the Jewel on 63rd Street, or Caputo's,
rotate
or
it.
whatever, exactly, you move it
Yeah, to
around.
move
Well,
around.
and maybe we have a little spot at different events. I mean, events are coming back, there's a bunch of ones that are starting to sprout up, that are maybe in their second or their third year, that, you know, maybe we start just coordinating with them, and we have a little space like we did at Heritage Festival back in the day. So we're talking about going where the people are, just have a little space there. It's a tent and table, a couple of chairs, you put up some informational posters about something that's going on. There's always something going on.
You didn't have it at Rotary Fest. Should have had it at Rotary.
I agree.
Can we still?
Sure we can.
Yeah, we never asked.
Who approves the permits?
I was just gonna say, we.
Community events.
We never asked. I suggested, we never asked.
All right,
All right.
I think, is that some suggestion?
Well, I think the standing
Rotary
committee conversation.
Fest, did we,
What?
do we have,
Want me to put on new business?
do we take that down? Rotary
I would
Fest?
just put that as an example. I think there are other community
Yeah.
events that.
Yeah, but I want to specifically, I mean, that's the biggest one of the
Sure.
year.
Sure.
That's the biggest one
I
of
don't
the
see why
year.
we couldn't.
And I think, we
We used to
should
manage that
capture
kind
that.
And it wasn't the whole council.
All
You would
3 days.
sign up for, you'd have
Right.
2 of them signing
Right.
up for time slots.
Right. Except Baker. We made Baker stay there the whole time.
Yes, that's true.
But give them ride tickets.
All right, well, it's getting late, and I think the standing committee discussion is probably going to take more time than we should responsibly devote to it right now. This list was not the end of the list. This was what Dave wisely said was the most that we could probably get to tonight. There were other things such as social media and a bunch of other stuff we can get to another time. Yes, social media. Standing committees really goes back to the eternal debate about where is the proper place for the pendulum. We have standing committees. There was a time when they were used extensively, now they're rarely used at all. What are we doing with them? But I don't think that discussion is going to get done before midnight, so we should probably stop here. Any last thoughts, comments? I do want to take a comment on public comment.
Is it okay?
Sure.
I'll make my comments short. Regarding the coffee with the council, when I first moved here, they were always at the library. And so it was a standard location, and it's center of town, and it was It was just the table and the mayor and a couple people from the village. And people just came and went, and you'd sit down, you could socialize, or you could, and something might lead to something else. And that's exactly where she changed the salting issue for me in Clyde Estates, where I brought up the salt. She said, and she talked to Steve Ruffalo, who was sitting there. She said, just do it on the intersections. So that was how that was handled. Suggestion. The consent agenda. Remember a couple weeks ago, I was really embarrassed. I got up there and I started talking about something that was on the consent agenda. It's not titled consent agenda. So can I suggest that it's typed on there so that people know, like me, that don't know what this is called, that this is the consent agenda. So when I get up there after the consent agenda's been approved, and I start talking about it because I don't know that it's a consent agenda. Because you don't go through it page by page.
You're talking about the staff reports, right, labeled or not, the actual, yeah, got it.
This is the consent, and then Enza said, that's what I'm talking, because and Martin, you said, I don't know what you're talking about, and I said, it's over there on the table. And then Enza said, it's a consent agenda, right?
No.
No, I think you were talking about a manager's memo.
Well,
These are considered managers' memos.
whatever you put out there, and however you
I didn't know what you had in your hand, that was my problem.
however you define, it's the list of all the monies that you're approving all at one time.
Oh,
It's the papers that tonight
yeah,
you
the
did.
bills payable.
So this is the
Manager's
consent.
memo.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean, Laura, I think we can label those.
Well, whatever it's called, so I don't even know what it's called to this day, except I assumed that this was the consent agenda for tonight.
No.
No.
Manager's memo.
They're
No,
each
no, no, no,
individual
no, no.
manager's memo
This
for
is,
each
no,
item.
no, yeah, the manager's memo for each item on the consent.
On the
So,
agenda.
this packet has all the items on the agenda,
Yeah.
you know.
Oh, so you're saying,
So this is all the
First-
monies that you're.
No,
all the-
it starts
Yeah.
with the consent.
That's the claims orders.
It goes
It just keeps
to
going.
active, and then it goes to first reading.
Yeah, it's
That's
in
right.
order of what's on the agenda.
Yeah,
Follow
so
the-
if you coordinate it, if you
Let me
say,
grab that.
We can share those.
You don't need to teach me tonight.
Right,
All I
we'll-
want you to do
we'll
is
resolve
label
later.
it so we know what we're talking about. And we're not ignorant public that gets up there and totally throws everybody and we're out of order because we don't know what order, we don't know when to get up. Yeah, I know.
Middle
Right.
school.
But that's the consent agenda.
Right, but it's underneath, each thing is listed.
Each page is a different item number, but the whole thing is the consent agenda.
no, no, this is all the staff report.
It's got the green sheets for the first reading too.
Instead of having two piles of paper, couldn't you just staple the agenda to the top?
Up to the top of this.
So that everything is in
Yeah,
order?
instead of having
Here's the
two
summary,
piles.
here's
Because you run out of one and you don't run out of the other, and then nobody has both.
Stapled together. There's one packet to pick up on the way in, you're done. If you've got a packet, you've got a packet.
If you don't, you
If
don't.
they've run out, then they can get more. But then you've got.
Next week, I'm bringing up as item of new business, stapling all things.
You don't need to do this. The other, okay, and then related to the part where I hate the word transparency, but just so that the information is out there, the part about the roads, when B got up and said, is Clyde Estates on this list? Well, we couldn't see, I still couldn't see with my glasses, the list of street names. Why don't you put it on the back side of the sheet that you're putting, I mean, that's $2,500, $22,500,000. We want to know what it, we had two streets talked about tonight that are both in line to be paved, and we don't even know if that's part of it or not. Okay. And then I always want to hear from the council members, when you have your council member reports, why can't you report on, you're all assigned to a commission of some sort, right?
Yes,
Why can't that be part of your committee report?
that's what I suggested.
That's what he did suggest.
Oh, I didn't catch on to that. And then I also
If
had.
there's something to report.
Right. I got what Dave said, if you went and there wasn't anything to talk about, you don't have to say. If there's a Monday holiday, is your agenda going to come out to the public on Thursday instead of Friday because of the two-day problem, the two-day requirement?
It's not 2 working days, it's 2 days.
It's just 48 hours.
48
Oh,
hours, 48.
okay.
Traditionally, it
So-
hasn't.
Oh, so it doesn't need to come out on
So it doesn't
Thursday?
No, doesn't have to, and traditionally it hasn't.
If the holiday's on Friday, it'll come out on Thursday.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, I don't know of any though, except for Good Friday, but I don't think that's a holiday.
Well, the
to
4th of
vote.
July will come
Oh,
out on
okay.
July 2nd, right?
And then the only other thing I had was, when we have long meetings, can't we continue the item till the next week? Is that so difficult
No,
to
we
do?
can't, sometimes we can. It's not unheard of.
Because I know Westmont does it, and I know that there's been, I mean,
We have more
long
stamina
meetings
than
here.
Westmont. We have more stamina than Westmont.
It's just, I think it's just, it just feels like things are just being rushed through when there's so much that the public, so much public interest in it.
It's a judgment call.
Thank you.
That's been done. It can be done.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any more? Mr. LeCran, sure.
When a council meeting is over, one of the things that has to be clearly stated is, what direction are we giving Dave and his staff to do? What are we telling them to do?
I agree with
I've
Tom.
been to some meetings. I've been to a meeting where you talked and talked for at least 3 hours, but I had no idea what you were asking. Dave
Well, that's because
to
we
do.
have no idea.
Yeah, and every once in a while, there's
No,
also
that-
Dave calling around to us and saying, what the heck did you do?
That responsibility first and foremost falls with me.
But that is,
And if I don't do it, it's his.
but that is why we need to have clear direction through a motion and a second. We're directing staff to do X.
Well, but sometimes at
That's the
workshops,
easiest.
it's not gonna happen.
Well, true.
We're not gonna have a vote at the workshop.
But then there's not clear direction.
Well, but that's why I said that. It's incumbent upon me to make sure we have clear direction.
See, but then Dave
Well, no,
says
we-
he has
we-
clear
we- we
direction, and he
decided
does
to
whatever he
give
wants, so.
Well, sometimes the direction is not to give any direction.
Dave, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
Seriously.
What position do you want me to
The
take?
purpose of the meeting. And one other last thing, and it's probably not important, but you do things where you run the meetings and you're following the open meetings act.
Yes.
I'm not sure how many people know what's in that. I understand that elected and appointed officials have to take a test.
I think all citizens should take the test. That'll be under new business next week.
But there is something like, I went into executive session, what's that? Why is it not open?
Executive session, yeah, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's a because,
Rhetorical, sorry.
according to the Open Meetings Act, please, this is what you have to do. And, just once or maybe at the beginning of the year or something, explain that to people.
Good suggestion.
Luckily, we
Quarterly
can say
summit.
in the motions why we're going into executive session.
We have to.
We have.
But I think he was
Yeah.
speaking more broadly as
Yeah.
to how the Open
No, I
Meetings Act
understand.
works generally.
I understand.
Yeah.
Bring in the Attorney General's office, give us a presentation.
We're thinking of amending it so only 3 residents can talk at one time.
Anthony?
Just basically just a comment off of just the coffee with the commissioners. I'd just like to keep it available to residents here in, Downers Grove. Being that I am a student of DGN, there are some people here in our community that don't have the skills to, openly speak in front of people. So, for a student, and from a student's perspective that, wants to become knowledgeable of what's coming and, what's going on in the community, just to be able to talk to, an individual commissioner face to face and just become knowledgeable about what's coming in the community is a good thing to have within our community. Because there are some people who aren't able to get up to the podium and ask questions or speak on a larger basis to a lot of people and in an open crowd. So keeping that within an open environment and being able to speak to an individual about just a simple issue, I would like to keep that available. And that's basically what all you agreed upon, but just having that available to everyone, and even from a student's perspective, is a very good thing that our community provides.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
I understand the process of being here tonight and how everything was handled. I want to go back, if possible, maybe some of the older people would know, I go back to the sign ordinance. I first found out about it when I got a notice that I was in violation about towards the end of last year. I knew nothing about what was going on 7 or 9 years prior. If I would have known that, I would have been down here long before that. And I think a lot of people were in the same position, that they knew nothing about it until they got notices in the mail. And I've gotten several hundred phone calls at my shop. I've got phone calls from Florida, Washington DC, Southern Illinois, Northern Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan. What's going on? I've voiced my opinion. And it's, and the businesses, as I stated before, are so upset about this. It's ruined some of the business, not ruined, but upset some of the business. They lost business. Signs are smaller that they can't see where their businesses are at. And it's a problem for the village. That's why I'm probably the only one really addressing it, because it still involves me.
Right. Why don't I take that offline, because it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we were just talking about in terms of council governance. But I'll answer your question after we adjourn, if that's okay with you.
So, well, addressing that too, didn't the village think that they ought to tell the businesses that needed to comply with a letter?
Yes.
Instead of a violation
I'll also
notice?
address that offline, because we're way off the scope
Way
of
off
council governance now.
Occurred to us.
That was public comment in the other room a while ago, but I'll answer that question too.
All right, Mayor, I move to adjourn this meeting.